Good morning. 3 minutes after 10. Big show today. I thought parking tickets, potholes, motorway lanes, you name it. We're going to be covering all the biggies. It's a mad one, isn't it? I mean, it is not Brenda from Bristol territory. I think we can safely say that. It's been 4.5 years, or it will have been come July, since we've had a general election. The last one felt like it was almost an annual affair, didn't it? How many prime ministers, how many Conservative leaders have we had since the last one? We're on our third at the moment, who have all been unprecedentedly awful. Hearing Rishi Sunak this morning attempting to campaign on his record was a moment of almost perfect comedy. You sort of say to yourself, well, which record is that, champ? Which record is that you're campaigning on? I remember when inflation went through the roof. Do you remember that? And he was absolutely adamant it had nothing to do with the government, and it was everything to do with international factors, most obviously energy price rises caused by the war in Ukraine. And then those situations resolve themselves and inflation comes down. He's claiming all the credit for it. And I've got to say, I was amazed this morning that interviewers let him. He said, all of the tough decisions that I've made have put the economy back on an even keel. And nobody said, which decisions are those, champ? Which decisions are those? And now that we have brought inflation down, how did you do that? And if you had the levers and the powers to bring inflation down, would that not mean that you were responsible for when inflation went up? I mean, it is one of those mornings where your sort of relief stroke interest in the looming election is leavened quite seriously by the reminder of just how broken the country is. The fact that the media has been reduced to letting Rishi Sunak make ludicrous claims about everything from the economy and inflation to how other European countries are viewing his Rwanda plan. So his latest wheeze is to claim that 15 other European countries support his Rwanda plan. So he's boasting about other countries supporting his Rwanda plan while admitting to Nick Ferrari this morning that the Rwanda plan is not going to have come to fruition before they actually go to the polls in July. If you look at what these European countries have actually said, you could just about make a case for Austria on a recent visit doing one tiny bit of it. And that would be that if you go to a third... Well, no, you can't even do that because Austria certainly hasn't said we're going to change the law in order to render an unsafe country safe. So he's claiming that 15 European countries are backing him on the Rwanda plan that he has admitted this morning is not going to have come to fruition before they actually go to the country in July. But he's lying, and he must know that he's lying. Because no European country would be able legally to change a law to alter the meaning of the word unsafe to mean safe. And then if you process asylum applications offshore and those applications are successful, the plans being discussed at the European Union would involve those applicants coming back to the country or coming to the country in which they had arrived before being sent to a safe third country, which couldn't be Rwanda. That the only bit that maybe works would be the bit about if the application is unsuccessful, they have to stay there. But, to my shame, I don't know the detail of that on the Rwanda plan. What happens to the unsuccessful applicants for asylum? Do they all stay in Rwanda as well? And do they stay there with exactly the same rights as the successful applicants and therefore presumably exactly the same costs to the British Exchequer? So it's everything that he says that's nonsense, not just bits of it. It's not like traditional politics. This is the post-Brexit, post-Boris Johnson election, where the Conservatives are going to triple down on lying through their teeth about everything. The only question, really, the only mystery facing the population is whether or not the client media retains enough power to let them, or whether Keir Starmer will, through a combination of attributes and circumstance, luck if you like, and judgment, whether he'll be able to rise above the ludicrous fray in which 80% of the media has been complicit in the complete corruption of the country, visited upon it by first Brexit, then Boris Johnson, then Liz Truss, and then Rishi Sunak, with a little sort of hiatus, I suppose you could call it, under Theresa May, who just sought, if not to slam the brakes on and put the country into reverse as it careered towards a cliff edge, then at least to slow things down a bit, or to get some mattresses in place at the bottom of the cliff before we careered off it. And, speaking of Theresa May, which I don't do often, Speaking of Theresa May, yesterday's little speech outside Downing Street was up there, wasn't it? It was up there with the one where she couldn't stop coughing, and then the letters started falling off the wall behind her while she was delivering her conference speech. I mean, for a Prime Minister not to have apparently accepted the wisdom of umbrellas, having got nearly, what, is he in his mid-40s? Umbrella, I suppose normally he's got someone to carry it for him, has he? I mean, why couldn't he do that yesterday? Bad optics? No, you can't. You hold it yourself. I can't speak and hold an umbrella at the same time. Hey, who do you think I am? Tommy Cooper? This is absolutely impossible. Well, can't someone else hold an umbrella? No, because then people will say that he's your butler. I said, but he's not my butler. My butler's been hiding since I became Prime Minister. He's up in Richmond, making sure the swimming pool is properly chlorinated. So why is there no umbrella? How could they be doing so badly? How could it be such a mess? I actually know the answer to that question. The answer to that question is what could be best described as the James Cleverly principle. And the James Cleverly principle is a neat way of describing the abject shallowness of the talent puddle from which Rishi Sunak has been required to make key appointments. But those are the public appointments. If you think, I mean, the Liz Truss principle would perhaps be even more effective. If you look at the talent puddle from which Liz Truss made key appointments, you'd remember that, oh, Lord, sometimes you remember things and it makes your, it actually makes your tummy flip over in terror at what's been done to a country you love. But Liz Truss made Therese Coffey Deputy Prime Minister and Jacob Rees-Mogg Secretary of State for Business. That's the calibre of candidate that the Conservative Party can draw on post-Brexit and Boris Johnson. But the James Cleverly principle means that somebody as inappropriately named as James Cleverly can rise all the way to the Home Office and indeed the Foreign Office. He can do both jobs in the space of a year. And if that's what's happening in public, you know, if you've got to bring pie-face Cameron back from richly deserved political oblivion, rarely has a politician deserved oblivion more than Davy Cameron. If you've got to bring Davy Cameron back from political oblivion to be your Foreign Office Secretary, it's fairly clear that the pool of talent from which you would ordinarily be drawing your cabinet appointments is shallow to vanishing point. Shallow to vanishing point. So if that's what's happening in public, imagine what's happening in private. Imagine the kind of candidate who looked at Rishi Sunak's premiership 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, and thought to himself or herself, do you know what? That is a bandwagon to which I really want to hitch myself. That, lads, that is the play. What's that? Yes, I do want to work for Team Rishi. Yes, I do want to be part of this exciting political project. Yes, I do want to be in the room where it happens when Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister. And that speaks to a calibre of candidate that would probably make James Cleverly look like Abraham Lincoln. What kind of person is currently sitting in Downing Street, quotes, masterminding, end quotes, the election campaign? So that is how, A, the optics yesterday could be so unbelievably awful, and B, a Prime Minister can end up delivering a speech which is both drowned out by the sounds of Dee Ream's seminal "Things Can Only Get Better" and almost drowned literally by the pouring rain in which he tried to deliver the speech. You would need a heart of stone, wouldn't you, not to feel sorry for Rishi Sunak as he gave a sort of plaintive, puppy-eyed glance towards the cameras and then turned around to display his sopping wet back as he walked his way back to Downing Street. And guess what? Turns out I've got a heart of stone because I didn't feel sorry for him at all. The combination of hubris, arrogance and catharsis that Rishi Sunak represents is well, it's almost performance art in its ridiculousness. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. So there are questions I can answer, and there are questions I can't answer. But there are no definitive answers to the first question of the day today. So there will be no rounds of applause. I can't quite imagine who would constitute a Ray Liotta at this point in proceedings, but why now? Why has he gone now? Why do you think he's gone now? 0345 6060 973. I will be probably nudging the question after 11 o'clock today towards how could anybody vote Tory after the 14 years we've just endured. But that and that's not a question about or a presumption that everyone's going to vote Labour. But I am looking for answers to the question of why you think he's gone now, because none of them are good news for the Tories. The most remarkable thing I saw yesterday was reports that they were submitting letters of no confidence. We'll talk to Natasha about this a little later, but the idea that they might have one last round of rancorous infighting, one last volley of circular firing squad. Can you look me in the eye and tell me that they are not mad enough to do that? This lot are mad enough to do anything. It would be comedy were it not for the tragedy that they have been in charge of our country for 14 years. A party that could put Nadine Dorries in charge of media and culture, in charge of the arts. Just an extraordinary cavalcade of incompetence and corruption that perhaps will culminate on July the 4th of this year. But don't take anything for granted, because remember that the power wielded by the billionaire-owning, Tory-donating client media is absolutely immense. Daily Mail, Rishi seizes the initiative. He seizes the initiative? He couldn't even keep himself dry. He couldn't even seize an umbrella. But he seizes the initiative. In the pages of the Daily Mail, you have Michael Gove's ex-wife comparing him to Macbeth and meaning it as a compliment. I'm so desperate now are these people to pretend that things aren't awful and that their role in the awfulness is not destined for the history books, that you even have the Daily Telegraph essentially trying to make a joke out of things can only get wetter. And the Sun, I think, quite interestingly, is expressing unhappiness that we're having an election at all, because apparently they were all looking forward to the Taylor Swift tour and Wimbledon. So why now? Why now? I've steered clear of some of the obvious answers to that question because I want you to bring both the obvious and the unobvious solutions to this first mystery of the day. Why do you think Rishi Sunak has gone now, when all political wisdom, everybody actually, I think, said they'll leave it as long as possible on the Macawber-ish principle that something will come up? So the most obvious answer to the question of why he has done this now, 0345 6060 973, is that Rishi Sunak has had a proper crack at reading the runes. He's had a proper go at working out what lies ahead, and he's decided that this is as good as it gets, up to and including the humiliation of spending 2 years talking about little else but small boats and your ability to stop them by deporting perfectly peaceable, genuine asylum seekers to a country that recently shot dead asylum seekers or refugees who had the audacity to protest about their paltry food rations, changing the law to call that unsafe country safe, promising that you were the man to see planes take off, putting in the Home Office a woman who apparently dreams at night of Daily Telegraph front pages featuring planes full of refugees flying to Rwanda, and then having to go to the country before any of it has happened. It's as if he bet the house on deporting refugees and called an election before he could lose it. It's absolutely extraordinary. Shall we open up the phone line? Shall I spare you a longer than you? Some people thought today's monologue might take you up to past. But it doesn't. It's not like the previous moments in recent British politics. This is the most normal one we've had, oddly. 2019 was an election fought upon version 2.0 of the Brexit lie. So 2019 was, we'll get Brexit done. Isn't it odd how no Tory in the country is going to campaign this year on the fact that they got Brexit done and it's all going brilliantly? Mad to think that in the space of 4.5 years you can go from promising to get something done, claiming that you've got it done, and then hoping that everybody has forgotten about it by the time they go back to the ballot boxes 4.5 years later. 2017 was possibly the most freakish election of all because Jeremy Corbyn secured more votes than anybody expected because huge swathes of the country, terrified by the prospect of becoming the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself, thought that he offered the last opportunity to find some sort of escape route from the mad Brexit that Boris Johnson and the rest of them were determined upon. So 2017 was crazy. 2015 was semi-normal because David Cameron went into it expecting to lose and at best to come back with a coalition, with a second coalition government, which meant that he would never have to keep the promise to deliver the referendum that would turn the country into the first population in history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself. So in a way, this is the most normal election that we've had in almost a decade. Why, though, has he called it now? 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 10. There is one answer to the question that we've started with today that almost flies in the face of my profession. We get paid, which I know what you think. You get paid for this? You get paid for this? Yeah, look, nowhere near as much as Rishi Sunak gets paid for whatever it is that he does. But I do get paid for this. And therefore, we like the idea that there are complicated plans afoot, that there are issues unfolding in need of deep analysis. We like to puzzle over the plans and the plots. There is one answer to the question of why he's gone now that actually flies in the face of all of that complicated analysis. And I will share it with you, but not until we've done a little bit of complicated, well, not even complicated, a little bit of detailed analysis. And Byron can start in Swindon. Byron, what do you reckon?
It's anecdotal, but is there a possibility that Sunak hasn't actually got much belief in the Rwanda bill being successful? My reason for it is because he's already said that planes aren't taken off before we go to vote.
Yep.
Which potentially saves some face for him, because obviously if he were to leave it a lot later on in the year...
Oh, I see. Vote, yes, okay.
It could be a potential that we would have seen the Rwanda bill working for good or for bad, and that could be another feather in his cap, or not.
Or... And I'm glad that you've opened the door now to some speculative analysis. Or it will take off. They will take off, possibly even in July, but they won't work in the sense of, quotes, stopping the boats, end quotes. Because I think the first 3 months of this year have seen the highest ever numbers crossing the channel. I need to double check that. But that would suggest that it's not working as a deterrent. And then even if it were to become a reality as opposed to simply a threat, that wouldn't work as a deterrent either. So in order to keep the balloon of bloviation inflated, he has to go in early July, because then he can both pretend or indeed predict that it is going to happen, that the planes are going to take off, and avoid the consequences of the planes taking off, but the boats not stopping.
Yeah, it's a fact. I think it's something that is potential. I mean, I'm not quite sure how we've gotten here with Rwanda.
Well, that was my next bit. That was my next question. Is that I'm not convinced that there are that many people out there whose vote in July or November is actually going to depend upon the Rwanda policy, all the small boats. I think it's another example of how the party has been captured by a sort of UKIP-y rump, by a Farage-y stink, and unfortunately it's addled all of their senses.
I do totally agree, actually.
So NHS you'd look at, wouldn't you, first, probably? I'm not even the economy. You can talk until he's blue in the face about the cost of living or inflation coming down. As a quarter of Londoners yesterday were reported in the Evening Standard as not having a spare 50 quid for an emergency bill. So you tell them, great news, your weekly shop's only going up by 2% now, as opposed to the 14% that it was going up by last year. I just don't think it touches the sides. And that's where his wealth does become pertinent. Thank you, Byron. Lee's in Belfast. Lee, what would you like to say?
I think that Rishi's doing this now because, ironically, things can only not get better.
That doesn't work. Things can only get worse.
Yeah, I guess so.
Go on.
Anyway, realistically, inflation now is probably going to be the lowest it's going to be all year. Mm-hmm. And I think this is pretty much Rishi just trying to get Labour a small majority as he can by trying to throw everything and the bus at them. and basically try and get a small majority before he flies off somewhere else and leaves the country.
Well, he can't. I know a lot of people saying that he, wants to get the kids into school in California and stuff like that. But he is obviously running for the constituency in Richmond. So I think that's probably a bit of a red herring. Although I don't never take anything off the table since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. That was the day that any speculation that seemed too ridiculous even to contemplate became a non-existent phenomenon, didn't it? There's nothing too ridiculous if Liz Truss can become Prime Minister. But I did, because this hinges upon claiming that he's brought inflation down, which of course he hasn't. But that's what he's claiming. Everywhere he goes today, he's saying we've brought inflation down, and no one is saying, but doesn't that mean it was your fault it went up in the first place? So the thing is, we look for, I suppose, a firm foundation to the answer to the question of why he's gone now. And of course, your analysis is that there isn't one. There isn't a firm foundation. This is just the least flimsy foundation on which he could launch an election campaign in the next 6 months.
Yeah, the country's on fire, and he's just worried that there'll probably be on more fire by the time he calls a later election. So just try and get it done now while he can possibly do the best he can with the bad situation. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. And how bad is that situation? That is the question to which we will move next. Things can't only get better, suggests Alex. I don't know why. I just prefer things can only get worse. It's not as catchy, I grant you. And obviously worse doesn't rhyme with better. But it's not a rhyming song title anyway. A couple of phone lines free now. You can grab the ones that have been vacated in all the usual ways. James is in York. James, why now? Why do you think now?
Morning, Jim.
Hello, James.
I've got two reasons. I've got one that's me probably poking fun at him, and then I think I've got a little bit more of a serious reason. Which do you want to hear first?
I don't mind. Let's get the funny one out of the way first.
Get the funny one. I reckon it's July the 4th, right before the August school holidays. I reckon he's calling it now so he can jet off to California and get his kids out of school.
Yeah, I just dealt with that. Next.
The next, I reckon that they've got more letters in for the 1922 committee than they're letting on. And I reckon that what we've seen is Rishi, he's quite a petulant person. And
he is quite petulant, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think he's calling this as a threat to the Conservative Party, saying, right, this is me pulling the gun before you can throw me off the ship. Because I can't see, from any political polling, I can't see any proper political reason as to call it now. Why not have it as long as possible? You're so far behind in the polls.
Because things can only get worse.
Yeah.
That's why you do it now. So it's the anti-Micawber. Nothing's going to come up. Things can only get worse. So you can't really say that out loud as a Prime Minister, especially not one whose party's been in power for 14 years. But there is... As one other alternative, I suppose, that there is something absolutely awful in the pipeline that they know about and we don't, and they want to get the election out of the way before that happens. But the only, at the moment, Occam's razor would probably lead us towards the conclusion that they have decided, with whatever analyses and focus groups and plots and predictions they deploy, they have decided this is literally going to be the best week in the next year. This week. This very week is the best week. That's terrifying. But it's probably the reason. Coming up to 10:29, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mystery Hour on the way at 12, sort of weekly. Don't really need much light relief today, actually, but the news has been heavy, not just, of course, from the Middle East, but elsewhere, so we'll get stuck into that. But after 11 o'clock, I don't know, actually. Why don't you have a suggestion of what question you'd like to answer? And send it to me on 0345 60 60973. But I'm minded to ask how anybody could be contemplating a vote for the Conservatives after the 14 years that we've just lived through. And I say that quite generously. I say that from a place of genuine warm curiosity. I'm not suggesting you have to vote for the Labour Party. I am just utterly baffled some days as to how they can even get the paltry polling that they're currently getting, because it's as if you would need to have your head in a pillowcase not to hold them responsible for at least most of what has happened to this country since 2010. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 10. I got quite a few of you persuaded that he may not serve a full term as an MP. I wouldn't bet against that. This is the theory that flies in the face of all the careful and speculative analysis. And I tweeted this yesterday as a joke, not as a sort of Yabu sucks joke, or as he wants to put the kids in school in California type joke. I think Nadine Dorries came up with that first, so always be careful of, even in jest, ending up on the same page as Nadine Dorries. But I think it's possible that he has simply had enough. Occam's razor isn't going to deliver a single answer to this question. It's not infallible, Occam's razor, which, if you don't know, it generally is taken to mean that the simplest answer to any question is usually the right one. So I think Occam's razor is going to take you closer to, they've decided that nothing's going to get better. They've decided that nothing is going to come up. This is literally as good as it gets. It's a great film, that. But an alternative answer, and one which through the course of yesterday afternoon, I found myself actually increasingly thinking that's not a joke, that's actually quite a valid suggestion, is he's actually had enough. Imagine that. Imagine waking up every morning and being Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. I'm not, this isn't a personal attack. As Prime Minister, you're surrounded by people who either hate you or are secretly plotting to get rid of you, or who maybe quite like you but think that you're doing a terrible job. I can't imagine Rishi Sunak comes into contact with any colleagues who make him feel better than he did before they entered the room. I mean, what sort of state would your life have to be in if James Cleverly walking into the room made you feel better than you did before? He knows that Grant Shapps would stab him in the back, metaphorically speaking, quicker than you can say Michael Green. He knows that people like Kemi Badenoch have got their eye on the prize, you know, stuff the country, stuff the party, I want to be Prime Minister. And the worst thing, arguably, that Liz Truss has done to the Conservative Party as opposed to the country is to make even the most talentless incompetents in history think that they can actually become Prime Minister, because she proved that they can. The most talentless incompetents in the party can become Prime Minister. Liz Truss proved it. So you're Rishi Sunak and you're waking up every morning and you are surrounded by people who are either plotting against you or briefing secretly against you or struggling to hide their disdain for you personally and for your politics, your policies in particular. You've so got backbenchers who are supposed to, you know, have your back, but who are constantly agitating and mobilizing. You're worried about how many of them have already submitted letters of no confidence. You've got former colleagues like Johnson and Dorries taking the Daily Mail shilling to write hideous and ludicrous pieces about how everything would be better if only we hadn't fluffed everything up. And I wonder whether Mrs. Sunak has said to him at some point in the last couple of weeks, why? She said to him, you don't have to do this. And he's gone, yes, I did. No, but and she's gone, you don't, darling. You don't have to do this. You can get out now. Look at what it's doing to you. Look at, you know, our relationship. Look at the relationship with the church. Who are you doing this for? The country doesn't want you. The party doesn't want you. Your colleagues don't want you. We want you. We love you. Why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you doing? You do not have to do this. You can call it a day now. And Rishi Sunak sort of sat there and he couldn't come up with any reasons why he shouldn't call it a day now. And that's when all the other answers to the questions I've been asking this morning kick in. Because if you gave Rishi Sunak a reason for not calling the election now, what would it look like? Oh, well, if you wait, you're more likely to win. And he'd go, that's not true, actually. That's not true. So political tradition dictates that you leave it as long as you possibly can when things are bad in the hope that something good happens. But political tradition also dictates that the person, the incumbent, really, really wants to win. Really, really wants to stay. Really, really wants to keep their job. What if that's not true? What if the most fundamental precept of prime ministering does not apply to Rishi Sunak? He has had enough. He doesn't want to do this anymore. If you move that theory into the space we're exploring this morning, then every other answer actually becomes more relevant, not less relevant. He doesn't want to be Prime Minister anymore. Therefore, the fact that they don't think anything good is going to happen becomes more relevant. He doesn't want to be Prime Minister anymore. Therefore, the fact that the bloody boats aren't going to stop and the planes aren't going to take off, and I don't want to be here when that happens. I don't want to be in the job when those chickens that I hatched come home to roost. What if he just doesn't want to be there? Wow, James, you've just killed the whole show stone dead. You're obviously right. I mean, you could resign. You could give somebody else a chance. But why would he and why should he? He probably also believes he's got the best chance of minimising the damage that's going to be done to the Conservative Party at the ballot box. Who would you replace him with? Grant Shapps? Jeremy Hunt? James Cleverly? Who are you going to replace him with? Who are you going to send out there to fight? So, he just doesn't want to do it anymore. That's my answer. What's yours? Peter is in Hereford. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First-time caller.
Well
so
done,
I'm adding
Peter.
to the cohort of new callers.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, I just listening to your last rant or
Rant?
your last
Rant?
Yeah, rant.
Rant? Peter?
Yeah, he speaks very highly of you.
Carefully considered monologue, mate.
Sorry.
That's
sorry.
all right. You carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I was responding initially to your question of why is he chosen now?
Yes.
And my belief is that he has done the analysis and he has this reputation for being an absolute focused on detail, careful with data,
Yes.
and he's driven him forward. And I think his analysis has shown that it ain't going to work.
Mm.
And he doesn't want to be associated with failure.
And yet he's going to campaign almost exclusively on the claim that his plan is not only going to work, but is already working, which means the longer he leaves it, the more proof there will be that it's not.
Exactly. And he himself has to keep up the front. The point it seems to me about him is that he's done the job. It's much tougher than he thought. Looking at the detail, it is not going to work. He doesn't know what else to do, so I'm going to get out of here.
And that, yeah, I like it. And that, again, speaks to all of the other answers that have been provided. So I wasn't expecting this to happen, Peter. I thought we were going to get a bunch of answers that contradicted each other or challenged each other. But actually, at 10:41, I think you've just made me realise all these answers could be correct. They're all part of the problem. It's all going belly up. And in order to campaign on the pretense that it isn't, you've got to get to the country as soon as possible.
Yeah. Put yourself in his position for a second if you possibly can.
No, I won't do that. It's too moist.
Oh, go on.
Oh, all right, then. Carry on.
You're looking at all the problems on your desk. Your analysis shows you that the solutions you thought were going to work, or that your Cleverleys of the world and the other bunch of no-hopers have put forward as a solution. You followed Badenoch and then use Braverman and whatever. And it's all not working.
Honest Bob.
Don't
forget Honest Bob Jenrick. Honest Bob Jenrick's there as well, sort of blowing in the wind.
He should have been.
Yes.
No, he's a good guy.
Oh, of course he is.
And Michael Gove's not going to deliver his 1 million houses or whatever it was they were going to deliver. And he's not going to level up. So you're looking at it all and you think, I don't know what to do.
Let's get out of here. Let's get out. You cut and run, Peter. You do. You cut and you run. I like it a lot. I'm in Hereford at the weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Only briefly. I'm on my way to Hay.
Yes. Yeah. No, well, it's not far from where we are now.
It's a beautiful part of the world. Underrated. I almost feel bad mentioning it on the radio because the last thing you want is a bunch of grockles turning up for a nice weekend away and spoiling the peace of one of the loveliest corners of the country and probably one of the least explored. Peter, thank you. A brilliant debut. 10:43 is the time. Natasha Clark will join me shortly, just to sort of have a look at some of the big picture stuff that the grown-ups are talking about. We will continue our contemplations with Sharon in Waltham Forest, who is, and I don't know why this would be, Sharon, you're the only woman to have phoned in so far. I get more female callers on this programme than any programme in the history of phone-in radio, But on days like today, it just doesn't happen, and I don't know why.
I don't know why either, but I'm glad to be on the show. Thanks very much.
I'm glad you're here. What would you like to say?
A couple of people have already said what I was going to say was my main point, which is about Rwanda, and that if you think about it and you look at it, he said the second half of the year, it's just squeaks into the second half of the year. But he doesn't have to now. If, for example, if the flights, if we had an election in October or November, and the flights hadn't gone or got taken off, which I don't think they were ever going to, then it would have been quite almost political.
You can't wriggle that. You can't wriggle off that hook, but you can say, no, they are going to take off. They're going to take off next week, which isn't a joke. That is literally what he's saying. He's saying they're going to take off in July, but not before July the 5th.
Yes, but when it was all sort of discussed, it was going to be autumn. Then that I believe that, as you rightly had said earlier on, it would have either gone bad or it would not have gone at all. And the fact would have remained that then that would have been so obvious. And the other thing about that, because quite a few people have said what I was going to say, I've got a list of things. I'll just say this: is that I think also his MPs might have plotted over the summer to get rid.
They could have got rid of him. He's getting noises from there. All of these things are possible.
It didn't take off. And the last thing I'll say very quickly, because obviously a lot of people have said exactly what I was going to say.
Stop apologising, will you, Sharon? I think you're much more interesting than all those other fellas.
The other thing I'm going to say is I don't think there's any money left. I think he promised compensation to people who rightly deserve compensation, and really quite heartfelt it was at the time. But I don't think there's any money left, and I think, why would you do that? You say it a couple of days before, and I've never seen a politician say so with such conviction that they will pay people money, and then.
Why would I want to be in the job?
Not going to get in. He already knew he wasn't going to get in, so he didn't have to.
Well, that is going to be very interesting. I suppose 97. John Major in 97 was probably a bit like that. We're both too young to remember much further back than that. John Major in 97 would be the last time a serious political figure, a prime minister, albeit one who'd actually won a general election, which I don't think Rishi Sunak is going to become. Fought a campaign that they knew they were doomed to lose, and it means he now spends 6 weeks pretending that he thinks he can win. The really depressing thing about Sharon's analysis, which tallies with some of what has gone before, is that it means my own theory about him simply on an entirely personal and non-political level, having had enough, setting that to one side for a minute, what Sharon and most other callers have suggested is that the entire rationale for going now is that they're going to build the entire campaign on lies, and the further off the election is, the harder it will be to sustain those lies. That takes me back to where I was at 10 o'clock, where I stressed concern about the failure to more widely appreciate just how corrupted the country is, just how corruptive and corrupt right-wing media, think tanks, and this iteration of the Conservative Party has become. Because even 5 years ago, I think there would have been pause in Conservative Central Office about an entire campaign built on lies, which has to go early, because if it doesn't go early, we won't be able to get away with the lies that we're going to campaign on. But what happened in 2019? Get Brexit done. What happened to all the Conservative MPs who absolutely refused to go along with the blackmail, effectively, of a no-deal Brexit, as if the country could ever tolerate that? What happened to all of those MPs? Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson chucked them out of the party. Rishi Sunak stayed. So you now have a party that looks at the prospect of fighting an entire general election upon a farrago of lies, and there's nobody in the building who says, we can't do that. All you've got is people in the building who say, yeah, OK, if we're going to do that, we better go now. Because if we go in November and the planes haven't taken off, we can't really talk our way out of that one. If we go in November and the economy hasn't suddenly undertaken some sort of miraculous recovery, then we can't claim that it's just about to. So we go in July and claim that there is a brilliant country, a brilliant record upon which you should place me or return me to Downing Street. I can't tell you exactly what it is yet, but all will become clear next week. All you've got to do this week is vote for me. And that means that we're looking at an election campaign where the governing party will be telling complete lies about the state of the country. 10:48 is the time. 10:51 is the time. Some early embarrassments on Rishi Sunak's campaign event this morning, prompting a couple of wags to suggest he might actually do a better job if he didn't campaign at all. And I think there might be some truth in that. There comes a point on a political trajectory where things can only get worse, with apologies to D. Ream. And not long after that point, where things can only get worse, it's as if people have stopped listening. It's as if nothing you do can change the mood music. But then the worst thing that can happen is that you don't become a figure of hate. You become a figure of fun. The worst thing a politician can be is ridiculous. I mean, off the top of my head, you'd look at someone like Anne Widdecombe, I suppose. But to become ridiculous, sadly in this country with its right-wing media, to become ridiculous is not to become redundant. You can pop up on GBBs and get columns. Nadine Dorries, you become ridiculous. The right-wing media will still reward you. But for the electorate, when you become ridiculous, everything is lost. I think Rishi Sunak, during the course of this campaign, if you don't think he's there already, I think that he is in danger of becoming ridiculous. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is with me. It would be remiss of me, Natasha, not to remind you of yesterday's conversation.
Shall I bring my hat out from under the table in case you want me to
eat it?
Eat it.
Well, I don't think you were alone in thinking early doors that this was another round of rumour, but certainly by the end of lunch, the planets were aligning, weren't they?
Yes, and I think the penny drop for me was when we found out that David Cameron was flying back specifically for Cabinet. And before then, I think there was every chance that this was just another false start of these election rumours. So we were naturally cautious, did admit that it could happen, but thought it was unlikely. And I still stand by that.
Yes, you can, I suppose. You can say it was unlikely.
It was unlikely, but it happened.
It's like Leicester City winning the Premiership.
Sometimes these things happen.
1,000 to 1 shot at the beginning of the season, but it happened.
A dodgy clock is wrong twice a day, or whatever the saying is.
Exactly that. Why? Why do
now?
you think? Yeah, I've asked everyone else.
So from the Conservatives that I've been speaking to, a variety of reasons. I think things can only get worse is definitely a theme that is running through Downing Street right now. This is, they think, as good as it's going to be. The polls obviously are not moving, and they genuinely don't believe that the polls are going to move at all until the campaign starts in earnest. So they think that by kicking off the campaign now, there is a chance that now people start to think about it, that the public have a little bit, like you said earlier, switched off to the day-to-day of politics. And a lot of people, I think, were saying, we'll care about the election when it comes, but until then, we're not particularly interested in the ins and outs and the day-to-day of what's going on in Westminster. Other issues that I think are live issues for the Conservative Party. Could things get worse? Could we have a summer of more small boats crossings, other problems for the Prime Minister to trip over? We know that governments day in, day out have problems that pop up. And there is just the risk that with nothing else to fill that vacuum, there's not a lot of policy going on in Westminster itself at the moment. With that vacuum of we are all waiting for that general election, could something come up that's that we can't see, that's sort of not predicted, and cause a real headache for the Prime Minister? And one Tory I spoke to just said the words, why wait? What do you gain by going longer? If you're not sure that the economy is going to pick up, if you think inflation might dip again to the end of the year, if you're worried about a potential clash with Donald Trump in the election later this year in terms of the airwaves, media coverage, and where the attention might be elsewhere. And also, the sort of accusation that you don't want to be accused of squatting in Downing Street for too long. And I think they're already, the Labour Party have already been making that case for such a long time, haven't they?
2020 hindsight's a wonderful thing for all these Tories you've been talking to. Suddenly it's the most sensible and obvious thing in the world. But 24 hours ago, they'd all have been furiously adamant that it was never going to happen.
They were. Every single Tory MP, bar one I spoke to before lunchtime, thought this wasn't going to happen.
Is there anything in the... I mean, is there the slimmest possibility of an attempt on the leadership?
I don't think so at all. I think it's complete rubbish.
People were talking... Well, I have to remind you what you said yesterday about the possibility of an election.
I didn't say it was complete rubbish, though. I think that's I'm going to go slightly harder in on this one.
But there were, people who have, the ear of senior Tories have suggested that there has been a bit of a uptick in letters being submitted. Certainly the conversation is being held, and that would be in Crackpot Corner.
Yeah. It's just not going to happen.
The Crackpot Corner have kind of
they
taken over the party.
Sure, but the Crackpot Corner have been quite quiet of late. And even Andrea Jenkins, who is one of the only...
The queen of Crackpot Corner, possibly. No, you didn't say that.
I just meant that she's the one of two Tory MPs that has publicly talked about putting a letter in. Even she said yesterday, it's too late, guys. You should have done this 6 months ago. It's just not going to work now. The chances
great, though. Great theatre.
It would be so good for the plot, but I don't think it's going to happen.
It ain't going to happen.
You know, chances of 53 letters going in, not going to happen. Chances of him losing a confidence vote, not going to happen. You know, but what does it say about the idea of the election? The Tories are still a disunited party. Keir Starmer will capitalise on that. Keir Starmer will talk about Liz Truss, he'll talk about the legacy of the past 14 years, and Labour will say, you know, this means 5 more years of chaos, 5 more years of division. Wes Streeting said yesterday, look, if you vote these guys back in, they are going to get rid of Rishi Sunak at some point, and you're just voting for more chaos.
And replace him with goodness knows who. We can save ourselves the luxury of those conversations until the results are actually in, but we should probably talk about one result we won't be seeing, which is Nigel Farage's 8th failure to be elected to the House of Commons. He has bottled that opportunity and in true patriotic fashion decided that the American election is more important than his own country.
That's really interesting news from Nigel Farage today. And we're going into an election campaign where both parties are going to be saying the same thing and the same messages day in, day out. So it's important to sort of step back and realise that this is a bit of actual news. Nigel Farage not standing for the Reform Party, as he's revealed this morning that he will not be doing. That's good news for the Conservatives. It means their vote is less likely to be split by the Reform Party. So this will be welcomed by Number 10 Downing Street and the Conservative Party this morning. I don't think that it necessarily means that he won't be playing some part in the election campaign. Will we see him potentially at campaign events and will we see him campaigning on the doorsteps? Potentially, but it really does lessen the chances of Reform being able to split off the vote and of them being able to win a seat.
So the unflushable item has finally flushed himself, it would seem.
Well, maybe he's waiting for a nice job under Donald Trump presidency.
Could there be anything in the idea that the Tory party in its current form was so spooked by the prospect of Farage coming back that they have pulled the rug from under Reform's feet by calling it early? I'm sure he's arrogant enough to claim that, but would anybody sensible give it credibility?
I think there was an argument. I think some people within the Conservative Party have been saying that they want to get ahead of the Reform threat, and obviously we've heard from Richard Tice that he wants to stand candidates in every election, but he's not. He
spent a lot of his inheritance on keeping that limited company, which calls itself a political party, afloat. Of course.
But he's not got enough people to run in all of these seats, and the longer they go, the Conservative Party go, the more chance Reform have of taking those big chunks. That's what I think a lot of people think in Downing Street.
Of course, Farage also aware that he would fail in any British constituency he fought for, and therefore pretending that or maybe he's always believed that Britain just isn't an important enough country for him to give his attention to. But I wish he'd decided that 10 years ago.
Even if he didn't take an actual seat, which I think, again, is a really big ask, and he probably wouldn't win a seat again. He's lost 8 times, as you know.
7 times.
Seven times. This would be the 8th. But it would be unlikely, but he would still be raking in millions of votes across the country for Reform. Like, he's still got, I think, a lot of people still...
And Donald Trump, as you say, Donald Trump has got boots that need licking. It is coming up to us. Just gone 11 o'clock. Thank you, Natasha. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is 3 minutes after 11. Stop the boats versus stop the chaos, isn't it, really, this election? Except the bloke promising to stop the boats is also admitting that he's not going to be able to until after the election. They've been making that promise for forever, it sometimes seems. An interesting development at one of Rishi Sunak's campaign events, or the first campaign event that he has done this morning, where it's emerged that one of the people wearing a high-vis jacket in the McVitie's warehouse where he is conducting his event is actually a Conservative councillor who's told the journalist Adam Bienkov that he was asked to appear at the event, and then lo and behold, he asked Rishi Sunak an important question about the Rwanda scheme without anyone present, declaring that he was in fact a Conservative councillor rather than an ordinary warehouse worker, which was obviously the impression intended when they stuck a high-vis vest on his back, because it can't be compulsory to wear a high-vis vest in that environment. Do you know how I know that? Because Rishi Sunak isn't wearing one. He has rolled his sleeves up, though. And I look at Rishi Sunak, and I felt we had to acknowledge the existence of Nigel Farage with Natasha a moment ago, as he, true to form, makes a decision based entirely upon his own self-interest and prioritises America over his own country. Wasn't it him who complained about Barack Obama getting involved in a foreign country's politics? I mean, actually, let's take a couple of minutes to talk about the abject shamelessness of Nigel Farage, because we don't do it as often as we should. This is a man who said, when Barack Obama, Barack Obama correctly described what would happen to the United Kingdom in the event of Brexit with regard to an American trade deal and various other elements. At the invitation, in fact, of the UK Prime Minister, David Cameron, Nigel Farage was one of the people who said that he shouldn't be involving himself in a foreign country's, in another country's politics. How fraudulent and corrupt, as a human being, never mind as a politician, do you have to be to go from claiming that an American president has no business interfering in British politics to explaining that you're not going to get involved in British politics as a British politician because you are more concerned in working in America to help a candidate, adjudicated, of course, to be a rapist, to help a candidate adjudicated to be a rapist become president. Just think of the levels of moral and personal corruption you need to publicly argue against an American president getting involved in international affairs and then offering up as a rationale for your cowardly decision to bottle the opportunity to lose an election for the 8th time. You explain that actually you're prioritising the interests of an adjudicated rapist who wants to be president of America again in a foreign country over your interests in the politics of your own country. So I told you a while ago, I told you 10 years ago, actually, that the lure of Nigel Farage was unbreakable by facts. When you give people who have felt dirty because of their bigotries and their prejudices, when you give them permission to publicly air those bigotries and prejudices again without being shamed, then they will never, ever abandon you. It's exactly the same model as Donald Trump. Make it fashionable to be racist again. And people who had their racism silenced or screwed down by wokeness, as they call it now, political correctness, as they called it then, decency, as it is more properly known, they will never stop feeding from your hands. It's incredible, really, because what a liar. What a filthy liar you would have to be to pretend to believe that Barack Obama has no business and a president of the United States of America has no business commenting on British politics. And then, you know, less than a decade later, you are explaining that you're not getting involved in a general election in your own country because you're more interested in one happening in a foreign country. So he's on the list. Rishi Sunak is on the list. In some ways, this is a list of the people who have broken Britain, which is rather convenient, actually, given that I have written a book called How They Broke Britain, and for the paperback edition, which only came out about a month ago, I wrote an extra chapter. I wrote an 11th chapter on Rishi Sunak. It's very timely, isn't it? So Farage gets a chapter. I think, do we leave the media people out of this and focus just on politicians? So Liz Truss gets a chapter. David Cameron gets a chapter. So let's take another couple of minutes to talk about David Cameron, shall we? David Cameron, right? David Cameron in a 20-second vignette. Yes, I'm back, and it's time to reclaim my legacy and restore my credibility as an international statesman. I'm Foreign Secretary, and I'm hit. Oh, you what? An election? But I've only been here 10 minutes. I haven't even picked up the suits I ordered from Savile Row. How can you be calling it an? I can't. I'd say, well, you mean I'm not going to be Foreign Secretary anymore after July the 5th? How long is he going to have been Foreign Secretary for by the time he's not Foreign Secretary anymore? But this is all presuming Labour lose. And by the way, never, ever, ever take anything like that for granted. So David Cameron gets a chapter. Jeremy Corbyn gets a chapter, although I honestly don't think that Jeremy Corbyn can be at the top of the poll that I'm about to launch. Boris Johnson gets a chapter. Of course. This is just the politicians so far. And obviously in Farage's case, we lose... Well, we don't use the term loosely. He got into the European Parliament, didn't he? Where his friends, of course, in the AFD have just had to jettison a candidate for being very warm in his talk about the SS, the Waffen-SS. That's what one of the senior members of the party that Farage used to knock about with. In fact, it's a conduct so disgusting that even Marine Le Pen, who Farage also used to knock about with, has cut relations with the AFD over that intervention. So you've got Rishi Sunak, Nigel Farage, Liz Truss, David Cameron, brackets for Jeremy Corbyn. Can anyone really claim that Jeremy Corbyn bears more responsibility for the mess that the country is in than any of those other five? Because, of course, the sixth character is Boris Johnson. The question I'm going to ask you is, who do you blame most? 0345 6060 973. Who do you blame most for the mess, for the chaos that Keir Starmer describes and that Rishi Sunak is going to have to spend 6 weeks pretending doesn't exist? Unless he admits that the chaos does exist, but then claims that he is now somehow fixing the chaos. So who is most to blame for the chaos that has engulfed this country in the last 8 years? 0345 6060 973. The other names on the list, the other people to get their own chapters, include Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail. He is on the list for a number of reasons. I think the best way to highlight his disgusting contribution to public discourse in this country is with 3 front pages and then 2 appointments. So the 3 front pages that I think broke something fundamental to British culture, fundamental to British values, and fundamental to public discourse. The 3 front pages were enemies of the people. That was disgusting, that front page. That was dripping with Nazi resonance, to call judges, to call the independent judiciary enemies of the people. You might as well have had swastikas on the front page of the Daily Mail that day. So redolent of Nazi persecutions is that single phrase, enemies of the people, right? The second one was crush the saboteurs. So the parliamentarians who understood the consequences of a so-called no-deal Brexit and were desperate to take it off the table during Boris Johnson's ludicrous self-serving machinations, they were described, despite being democratically elected parliamentarians, they were described as saboteurs, another word that students of 1930s Germany will be familiar with the ramifications of. So you've got enemies of the people, you've got crush the saboteurs, and then you've got our Remainer universities. So this Herbert, who's just announced that he's not going to run again, the Northern Ireland Secretary, he's got a double-barreled name. I can't currently remember it, but it will appear in my inbox in Heaton Harris, Chris Heaton Harris. He wrote to every Vice-Chancellor in the country asking for details of academics who were teaching pro-EU courses. I'm not going to mention 1930s Germany again, but, you know, they might as well have rounded up all the books on those curricula and burnt them. So those are 3 front pages that, from the best-selling and most influential newspaper in the country, the House Journal of the Conservative Party, the chief cheerleader for Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, the editor-in-chief Paul Dacre gets a chapter, Andrew Neil gets a chapter, and Rupert Murdoch gets a chapter. So how many is that? Is that all of them? Oh, and then Matthew Elliott gets a chapter. He was the founder of various sort of think tanks and, of course, of Vote Leave, but I don't think his contribution to the story is well known enough for him to feature, unless you've read the book, for him to feature as highly as he might. So you're looking at an election on July the 4th. You're looking at a country in complete chaos. That's not a political opinion. That's just counting. Whether you're looking at the state of our waterways, the state of the NHS, the state of our armed forces, whether you're looking at the state of our schools, whether you're looking at the state of our roads, wherever you're looking, the country is in a mess. The country is in chaos. Who do you blame most out of that list, out of that charge sheet? Rishi Sunak is the one pretending that everything's going brilliantly. Nigel Farage is the one clearing off to America to lick the boots of an adjudicated rapist rather than get involved in the politics of the country that he has helped to bring to its knees. Liz Truss, I'm afraid I don't know what Liz Truss is doing now, which is something for which I think we can all be grateful. David Cameron, who of course called that ludicrous referendum in the hope of saving his own bacon from precisely the nut jobs and crackerjacks that ended up taking over the party. Boris Johnson, who is the king of the nut jobs and crackerjacks who took over the party. Paul Dacre, whose disgusting journalism propelled these supremely corrupt individuals into the highest offices in the land. Boris Johnson wanted to make him head of Ofcom, you know, head of the regulator that polices non-print media. And of course, when Boris Johnson resigned from Parliament rather than face the consequences of his own epic misdeeds, as judged by his own peers in a select committee, he ran away rather than take his punishment. Paul Dacre rewarded him with £500,000 a year to write gibberish about Barbie for the Daily Mail. So you can probably tell he's very close to being top of my list of the people who broke Britain, the people who most broke Britain. Andrew Neil and Rupert Murdoch, for very, very obvious reasons, not least in the former's case, as we talk about a bloke being chucked out of the AFD for his warm words about the Waffen-SS. You didn't get sacked as a Spectator columnist while Andrew Neil was chairman if you wrote warm words about the Waffen-SS. That's not an opinion either, that's just counting. So if you had to pick one of those people, or you could, I'm not writing another book or indeed another chapter, but if you think I've missed someone out, 03456060973 is the number. But you've got that list there. Sunak, Farage, Truss, Cameron, Johnson, Dacre, Murdoch. Who do you think is most responsible for the state of the nation? 03456060973 is the number you need. And you are welcome to introduce a name into the mix that I haven't yet picked up on. But that's the 11 chapters in how they broke Britain. So inevitably I'm going to think that I've got most angles covered. Who would you pick and why? And be as unobvious as... I've missed Dominic Cummings off the list. Crikey, how did I do that? You're absolutely right, thank you. Dominic Cummings as well. There you go. I thought there was only 10 on. That's the 11th character. Who do you think is most to blame for the state of the nation? 03456060973. You can put Jeremy Corbyn on there if you want. He gets a chapter because if your team loses 10-0, then your team's goalkeeper probably bears some of the responsibility for the scale of that defeat, the scale of that horror show, even if 20% of the crowd were carrying him around the stadium on their shoulders after he got thumped 10-0. But I presume it's going to be someone from the right. Who's it going to be for you? And crucially, why? 03456060973 is the number that you need. It's 11:16. 19 minutes after 11. You'd be hard pushed to refute Keir Starmer's description of the government and indeed the country as being in chaos. Rishi Sunak has decided to pivot from being the change candidate to being the continuity candidate, securing the knowledge that most of the British media will let him undertake such epic sleight of hand. But everybody paying attention would have to acknowledge that the country is in an absolute hole. Who do you hold most responsible for the depth of that hole? I've made some suggestions. Cynically and self-servingly culled from the chapter list of my own bestseller, How They Broke Britain. But I'm interested in your choice from that list, or indeed your nominations from outside of that particularly rancid pool of politicians, pundits and media types. Dawn is in Cuddington. Dawn, you can go first.
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
hi, first time on.
You're very welcome.
Love hearing your show.
Thank you.
So really quickly, Rupert Murdoch, number one, hands down. I think what he has done over several years, and I witnessed personally what he did also in America,
yes,
with his TV shows, his publications, everything. He is number one, hands down, I believe.
If I finesse the question slightly and say, since 2016, does he still come front and centre for you? Because I think personally that his influence waned as Paul Dacre at the Daily Mail's influence rose, and that actually by 2015, 2016, the influence of the Murdoch media was nowhere near as pernicious as it was previous to that, and also, as you rightly point out, in America in the Fox News era.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it might have waned a little. But personally, I think the damage had already been done. I believe the damage goes back to like 1993, 94 era. And I think that, I think it was over time, what he's done is not only he's kind of blindsided with the media and with TV programs, he's numbed America. He's numbed the not everybody in England, but hard-working people who are the build of our society. Yes. They come home from work, and he's numbed them with publication, he's numbed them with TV, and basically, I think that he is a humongous cause of what is going on right now.
I would go back beyond. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, and I do believe that he could have been totally the opposite had he not been as evil as he is.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine
not even evil. It could be self-serving. If he thought that there was more commercial opportunity in fighting on the side of the Angels, he would have done. And he nearly did, There's an extraordinary exchange between him and Ben Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post, when Woodward and Bernstein were doing the Watergate stuff. And Murdoch offers up, you won't believe this, Dawn, the best explanation I've ever seen of why journalism has and should have a liberal bent. Now, you're obviously going back 40 or 50 years, because it doesn't anymore. But he explained that if you have high education, high levels of empathy and high levels of curiosity, then you're bound to come to your job as a journalist with what could be loosely described as a liberal bias. And then he spent the rest of his career trying to do the opposite, trying to turn it on its head. So I take your point. I'd go back to 89, actually, not to 93. Yeah. I think that when Kelvin Mackenzie was permitted to publish that utterly disgusting Hillsborough front page without any consequences, punishment, or professional, if you like, consequences, and did it, of course, in cahoots with Downing Street, in cahoots with the police. That was a point where British journalism got fractured in a way that it has never, ever recovered from. To have a complete lie punted by police and Tories on the front page. Bernard Ingham, Margaret Thatcher's press secretary, went to his grave still pretending that he believed that disgusting front page was true, the truth, and it was a complete lie, and Mackenzie's reputation at the time was untouched. Of course, it's in tatters now. Dawn, thank you. Richard is in Tavistock. Richard, what do you reckon?
Thanks, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
So really appreciate having me on. I bit left field. I'm going to blame Nick Clegg.
Go on, because I can see why Mark Zuckerberg might be on the list. But go on, give me the Nick Clegg.
So he obviously got into bed with David Cameron in 2010,
yes.
The coalition. He then he campaigned on not putting up student fees.
This hasn't brought you. That sounds like a personal vendetta. That not doing student fees has not contributed to the actual seismic corruption of the United Kingdom, Richard. It is not a contributory factor to the breaking of Britain. It's not a question. It's not give me a ring and tell me why you don't like Nick Clegg. So you can go in on the coalition, the decision to go into government with David Cameron. Why is that the contributing factor to the breaking of Britain?
Sorry, so from memory, 2015 election, it was widely considered that it would be just a continuation of the coalition.
It was.
The two manifestos at that point,
or that they'd lose. Actually, I think Cameron was more surprised than anybody when he got an overall majority in 2015.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So, but going into that, they assumed they might be the largest party, and therefore they would need the Lib Dem support again. Manifestos are effectively negotiation documents, and from memory, the Lib Dems had the mansion tax on there.
Well, you're doing it again. Who literally is going to talk about the Liberal Democrats having a mansion tax in their 2015 manifesto as one of the reasons why our waterways are full of poo, why the NHS waiting lists are the longest they've ever been, why schools are creaking under the weight of their own architecture, why the cost of living has been the highest that it's ever been? Did you see what I mean? You sound like you've got a very deep dislike of Nick Clegg, but you're not making it pertinent to the state of the country at the moment, Richard.
Was the EU referendum from the Conservative side, and I think those two would be traded off in a coalition.
I think they were, but that in a way would have turned Nick Clegg into the person that stopped the referendum, wouldn't it? in 2015. If they'd had to continue in coalition, then Nick Clegg's price for staying in coalition would have been no referendum, and David Cameron could have gone back to the Tory party and said, "Oh well, lads, sorry about this, but obviously staying in power and not putting Ed Miliband in Downing Street is more important than your referendum, and in order to stay in Downing Street, we need old Knickers on the team, and therefore we're not." So I mean that is a counterfactual. But I don't think Nick Clegg. I certainly wouldn't want to give him a knighthood, but I don't think Nick Clegg deserves to be on the same page as Paul Dacre, Rupert Murdoch, and Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. Not personally. It's not a great phone line, so I can't invite you to return. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Mystery Hour on the way at 12, of course. Connor is in York. Connor, what do you reckon?
So, kind of along the same lines as the last caller, but a bit further back.
Okay.
I think you have to look a little bit at what happened into the election where Gordon Brown lost. And actually, the preceding negotiations that went on and his inability to put country over himself.
Do you think that's what he did?
I have a lot of time for Gordon Brown. He's a lovely man, genuinely. This is not I don't actually hate him. I think he's a very good person, but I feel like
he fluffed it.
He did.
It was Andrew was talking about this yesterday. I don't know if you were listening. Andrew Marr on the show yesterday was reminding us that when he chose not to go for that earlier election, which he would have won, he actually left the door open for David Cameron and everything that follows. So as a historian, I think you've probably got a point, but as a polemicist, you haven't, because he didn't consciously do any of the things that have brought the country to its knees, whereas everybody else on the list very, very, very deliberately set balls rolling in the direction that they subsequently went. He is an accidental contributor to the chaos, isn't he?
Yes, I think he is. I think it's a shame, like you say, that he ends up being in the same conversation, because it wasn't intentional. He loved this country, he loved his job, things like that. But I feel like if he had done some of the things that lots of people around him were telling him to do, rather than kind of making the decisions that he ended up making, it wouldn't have set us on the course that we are on now, 20 years later.
No, I mean, crikey, I guess you're right. If he had won, that's a counterfactual to end all counterfactuals. If he had won that election, and all the clever money says he would have done if he'd gone earlier, rather than doing the Micawber and thinking that things could only get better, things would get better and we'd go later, then the history of this country would look very, very different, wouldn't it, from 2010 onwards? Yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable addition to the list, but it is a contributory factor. I don't think anyone would, in terms of intent, claim that he'd played a greater role than any of the people that we've already listed. 29 minutes after 11, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation is looking at the chaos Keir Starmer is describing today, and the record that Rishi Sunak is seeking to defend. And we're wondering who, from a long and growing list of individuals, you would blame most, first and foremost, for the state of the nation, or indeed for the breaking of Britain. I hate to be a party pooper, but you won't get on if you're coming up with silly suggestions. You know, I mean, Nick Clegg is probably about as silly as I'm going to allow on this, and I only have 10 phone lines into the studio, and they are ordinarily full. But this is a conversation about. This is a patriotic conversation about what these people have done to our country. So comical suggestions, all you'll do is waste your time and mine. And I don't think any of us want that, do we? I'd have been a great teacher, you know. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. Paul Dacre and Rupert Murdoch writes no hostages, no contest. They spread the pernicious ideas that broke Britain, from neoliberalism to cultural Marxism, conspiracy theories, Islamophobia and xenophobia. Without them, there'd have been no Brexit, no Trussonomics and no so-called war on woke. I couldn't agree more, actually. And I think if you were to be going since 2010, which we are, then Dacre would be ahead. But prior to 2010, from sort of 79 onwards, then it would be Rupert Murdoch. For the avoidance of doubt, and I know I sound a bit draconian when I tell people not to ring into the programme, but number one, don't try to be funny. And number two, It's from 2010 at the earliest, 2016 at the latest, all right? So you can't have Margaret Thatcher. Because the country was normal. I might not have been perfect, but it was normal until 2016. You couldn't become Prime Minister by telling obvious, blatant public lies that were cheered to the rafter by the right-wing media. And don't challenge me on this. You could become Prime Minister by making promises that you weren't going to keep or by making claims that turned out subsequently to be untrue. But the blatant lies of Brexit, followed by the blatant lies of Boris Johnson, when coupled with the unquestioning support of a client media, despite the fact that they were all dedicated to a completely dishonest project, that was new, that changed. So in terms of the breaking of Britain, the way in which you could... So the Hillsborough front page is part of the process by which journalism was broken. But the culmination that we've seen in place since 2010 and particularly since 2016, who would you blame most for that? Let some figures off the hook, some more historical figures off the hook. So I think that's clear. Susan writes, I blame Cameron, the runaway arrogant coward, and Johnson, the corrupt liar. It's hard to decide which one is the most responsible. It really is. And of course, they both went to the same school, and their little psychodrama of competition is reportedly a large part of some of the problems that the country has endured. So I don't know if it has to be either or, Susan. You could just go for the two old Etonians on the list. And of course, Cameron did it through a sort of arrogant delinquency. He thought, well, I'm just good at this, and I'm lucky, and so I'll win, and so we'll have a referendum, and that'll keep that lot quiet, and then we'll do this. And whereas Johnson did it from a sort of motiveless malignity, as Coleridge would call it. He just, from this narcissistic desire to gratify himself all the time, whether it with parties during lockdown or just the boost, the endorphin hit of becoming Prime Minister or of toppling Theresa May, whatever it was. But for the historians, there would be no Johnson without Cameron. So as with the very reluctant addition of Gordon Brown to the list, sometimes the unwitting architects can be more effective than the very witting ones. Ian is in Diekirch in Luxembourg. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi James.
Hello,
for me, it's David Cameron, quite clearly, because going back in time, he had neither the nous or the nerve, if you like, to stand up to Farage, you know.
Yeah.
And that just caused chaos in following governments. And, you know, it led to the likes of Boris Johnson coming into play.
So, I mean, we forget how small that majority was and how obviously dependent on the Lib Dems it was in the first 5 years that he was Prime Minister. But the simple business, and it is something that I have a little bit of experience of, cutting Farage off at the knees for being the sort of race-baiting fraud that he so obviously is, as he's proved himself conclusively today by prioritising a foreign election over a British one. It's something that Cameron could and should have done, isn't it? And because he didn't, we ended up with a referendum. And because we ended up with a referendum, we ended up with all the madness that's followed.
And you end up with a referendum that he didn't really believe in either. And personally, I think that he should had a referendum a year or two in advance to ask the question as to what type of relationship the UK should have with the EU. And then he could have taken that. Then he could have taken that to the European Union, saying, "This is what the people would like." You know,
measure twice, cut once, and then have a vote on what we actually achieved and decide whether or not that was worth the schism in the first place. And of course, he's doubly useful for our purposes, Ian, because in this culture of impunity that we're talking about, where your bad actions don't have any consequences at all because the client media is going to cheer you even as you steer the country off a cliff, Rishi Sunak brings him back as Foreign Secretary as if he's some sort of elder statesman, when in fact he's an architect of catastrophe.
It's amazing.
It is
amazing that he's done that. And, you know, well, at least he won't be in the job much longer with a bit of luck.
Well, yeah, don't count any chickens on that front. Yeah. Thank you.
Too for that.
I mean, what is the interest in the UK at the moment in Luxembourg? Is there any interest at all in our latest round of political shenanigans?
I think within the majority of the sort of British population here, It's the issues caused by Brexit.
Right.
Mostly Brexit. It's quite obvious, really.
And yet that's not going to get mentioned. That's not going to get mentioned.
Small things from day-to-day life that affect people,
That's very true.
And it's changed just recently. But in the past, we were not even allowed to vote for Brexit. We had no say in a referendum, most of us, if you've been abroad for 15 years.
No.
Which is, to me, is a strange number. Why 15? Why not 5? Why not 25?
20. Yeah, no, you're right. I suppose there's got to be a number, they'd say. But yeah, I mean, that is mad, actually. Think about it. For the people whose lives have been measurably and permanently affected by the lies of the 2019 election, this election is going to be conducted without barely any mention of Brexit at all. Sunak mentioned it once earlier in an interview that I was listening to, but he almost did it under his breath because we got Brexit done. Because all of the talk about sorting out the economy. Another thing about Sunak, actually. So I told you it was hard to pick a winner on this list. Because Sunak, and I think this is a huge point as well, that doesn't get picked up anywhere near as much as it would in a normal country. Goldman Sachs, Sunak's former employer, their analysis estimates that Brexit has cost GDP about 5%, right? That's Goldman Sachs. Now, it's not infallible, but those are precisely the sort of analyses that Rishi Sunak relied upon to make his own fortune. The professional financial forecasts and analyses of Goldman Sachs are literally the tools with which Rishi Sunak began to build his own personal fortune. So it's fair to say that when it was his own money at stake, he trusted them. They come out and say, this thing you've done, 5% hit to GDP. I don't believe he has ever mentioned it at all. He even did a little flowchart in Downing Street about all the negative impacts upon the UK economy. COVID, Ukraine, the rest of it, fuel costs, energy costs. It didn't have Brexit on the list. That is arguably the best illustration so far of what we're describing, of the madness that we're describing. A man who made his fortune relying upon Goldman Sachs analysis completely ignores Goldman Sachs analysis of the economy of the country of which he is Prime Minister. Let's think about that for a minute. David's in Hampton Court. Who's it going to be, David?
It's definitely Cameron.
Whoa!
Top of the pile.
Well, crikey! I hope he's listening because he's edging ahead. I'm not sure he should be, but tell me why you think.
He is, honestly. Okay, let's go back to Sarkozy and Cameron taking out Gaddafi at Libya.
Wow.
Big photo opportunity, they're in there, whizzed in, everybody cheered them, then they just ran away. Left the country to disintegrate. They didn't do anything to help them put back any sort of government structure. So now we have warlords in Libya. You've got gangs shipping immigrants, across into Europe. So that's number one. Okay. Number two is definitely Brexit. Yeah. I mean, the guy, against Clegg's advice, decided to call a referendum and didn't fight for it. All he did was launch this massive Project Fear, but he didn't say what the good things about the EU was. He didn't fight for the EU at all. And then when he lost, he just ran away like a coward.
And if you go back further, when he was leader but not prime minister, he started pandering to the sort of Eurosceptic wing of his party, but both in and outside the European Parliament as well. But I mean, listen, I'm no fan of David Cameron. I hope that's absolutely clear. But to look at the totality of the current chaos. And I guess there's two questions I've been asking implicitly, aren't there? I've asked who are the architects and who are the arsonists. And you've got David Cameron under architect, but he's not actually an arsonist. He's an architect of the chaos. The arsonists are people like Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage.
Yeah, but he could have been the fireman.
Yes, he could.
He could have set, when it all happened and he lost, he should have then said, OK, I'm going to put the fire out here. I'm going to try and dampen things down. And he didn't. He just ran away.
He did just run away. I mean... He would say, indeed he did say, I can't be in charge of delivering this because I've made it absolutely clear that I'm opposed to it. But, to which we would respond by saying you didn't have to go immediately. And also, you could have worked a heck of a lot harder to make sure that it never came to pass, that it didn't come to this. JH has got a brilliant question. Can you guess what it is? There's one name that hasn't been mentioned, but actually I'd say there were two names that haven't been mentioned by anybody yet. I think that Tony in Liverpool is going to mention one of them when we come back after the break. So I'm going to leave this hanging. Who's the other one? Who's the other? So JH says, why do you guys always give beep beep a free pass? I think Tony's got that covered. There's another name. So when I've been doing the book tour, and that question comes up a lot, who didn't get a chapter? He's in the book, but he didn't get a chapter. Who? The more I look back on this period, and the more I look at the figures, I'll give you a clue. So the more I look at the rise of Dominic Cummings, the rise of David Cameron, the rise of Boris Johnson, the failure to cut Nigel Farage off at the knees, the cultivation of Rupert Murdoch, the cultivation of Paul Dacre. There's actually one British politician who has got a finger in almost every single one of those pies. I'll tell you who it is after this. I think my inbox has exploded, and you're 80 to 90% right. It's not Jacob Rees-Mogg and it's not Laura Kuenssberg. So who is the public figure most responsible for the breaking of Britain, whose name has not been mentioned yet? There are two candidates. Etty in Kentish Town. Well, what's happened to Tony, poor fella? She's got one covered, but the other one, Michael Gove. I mean, just think about it. Michael Gove was sent to, I mean, where do you even start? Michael Gove was responsible for Dominic Cummings coming into government. Dominic Cummings previously had actually worked for Andrew Neil at The Spectator and run an opaquely funded think tank dedicated to the destruction of the BBC. But he's very anti-establishment, So if you've got Dominic Cummings, then you've got Michael Gove's fingerprints all over him. David Cameron, I think they were godparents to each other's children, weren't they, until he sort of jumped on the Brexit ship. So Michael Gove's fingerprints all over him. Boris Johnson, possibly the most Govian character, because Boris Johnson was Gove's top pick for Prime Minister until suddenly he wasn't, until he thought that he was in with a chance of getting the job himself, at which point he announced that Boris Johnson was signally unfit to be Prime Minister and therefore he was unable in all conscience to continue supporting him. Michael Gove subsequently took 306 jobs in Boris Johnson's government when Boris Johnson had become Prime Minister. I don't think he's ever worked for the Mail, but his former wife did as a columnist. He certainly worked for Rupert Murdoch for years. In fact, when he went to America to interview Donald Trump after Donald Trump became president, as a brilliant journalist, Michael Gove felt it unnecessary to tell his readers that Rupert Murdoch was actually sitting in the room with him at the time. So, yes, I think Michael Gove deserves to be on the list. Etty's in Kentish Town. Who else have we missed off, Etty?
George Osborne, I think, has got, and he sits hand in hand with David Cameron.
Yes.
But on the basis that I think that so many of the problems today are a direct result of austerity and the underinvestment in public services, or underinvestment is a euphemism. The child poverty, the crumbling infrastructure, the crumbling schools, hospitals, everything. George Osborne was the architect of those, and I think they're worse than Brexit, and I hate Brexit.
He gets off incredibly easily, doesn't he, when you think about it? And I'm not entirely sure why, but he really does, because the notion of austerity being something that was necessitated by the economic circumstances is so pie in the sky.
It's nonsense.
It's absolute nonsense. And the destruction of social capital, support for people who needed it most, was deliberately removed by George Osborne, and did it while smiling. He did it sort of grinning. And the mad bit I realised when I was writing my book was that an awful lot of people voted to leave the European Union as a consequence of austerity, because they felt they needed a change or they wanted to send a message to the government that was in favour of staying in. But crucially, they thought, well, things can't get... My life has been signally diminished. I'm worse off than ever. My country feels damaged. Successfully portraying the consequences of austerity as the consequences of European Union membership delivered hundreds of thousands of votes to the Leave campaign.
Yeah. And he stands by it. When he was interviewed on the Campbell Stewart podcast,
oh yes,
he absolutely says that it was necessary to do. He won't back down on it.
What a snake!
Which implies an ideological, or I don't know,
just arrogance. I mean, there's nothing to support the idea that it was necessary. Now, I mean, we've got the rest of the world almost as testament to that. Never mind what Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown had already got underway when when it happened. And now he does a podcast with Ed Balls. You couldn't make it up, could you?
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, don't. And he was editor of the Evening Standard for 10 minutes as well. I can't tell this story because it's not my story to tell, but a very, very, very experienced newspaper man of all of our acquaintance was once at a party when George Osborne started trying to give him a lecture on how to edit a newspaper. He'd been in the job at the time for about a fortnight. I'll let you speculate on who that might have been. Thank you, Etty. Matt's in Chelmsford. Matt, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I've got a suggestion for you. Someone who's in the news today.
Yes.
He's never been elected to a British Parliament, although he's represented Britain.
I think you've let the cat out of the bag there, Matt, haven't you?
I think Nigel Farage, even though he's never had his hands on the levers of power, was actually consequential to the disasters that we've had. And
is he a symptom or a sickness, though?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think they would have had the Brexit referendum unless he had taken UKIP to a level where they were putting such pressure on Conservative MPs.
I think that's true.
That Conservative Brexiteers, as we now call them, were, in a position to put such pressure on.
And the fear of defection was the big driver, wasn't it? Forget that.
John Major, even going back to then. And then Cameron, of course, was forced into having a referendum, which possibly he didn't want. His right-hand man, George Osborne, advised him not to.
True.
Dare say some of the others, right? Yeah. So that's one thought. And then the other thought is that he beget, in a way, all that came from that. Because you could argue that I don't think it's necessarily likely that Boris Johnson would have become Prime Minister without the Brexit sort of fallout. Cameron's departure and so on. It was a consequence of that. Obviously, what happened with May, you could argue,
and moving what. But
that was all tied to Brexit.
Yes, of course it was. Of course,
then Boris Johnson. I don't believe Liz Truss would have become Prime Minister if you hadn't had all the situation with Partygate and what happened with Boris Johnson. I don't think she was ever thought about as a sort of next generation.
But by then the landscape was so ridiculous.
So decimated that she emerged out of the wreckage and said, "Here I am."
Yeah.
So I think that's one way of looking at it. It's not necessarily the most obvious one, but
it was. To be fair, I don't know when you tuned in, Matt, but he was actually the first name on the list, so it might be the most.
I tuned in late.
It might be the most obvious one.
I'm sorry. Yeah, probably.
No, that's all right.
I missed that. I've just one other thought for you is that. Apart from Brexit, he also gives permission for a lot of other stuff which is not very helpful, particularly on race and migration, where his not very subtle contributions enable others who are elected to sort of come out with more right-wing positions than perhaps they would have.
People really fail to understand the violence of that pivot, because in 2014, when he came into this studio to be interviewed and soiled himself quite spectacularly to the point where he had to be dragged out by his own public relations advisor because it was all going so badly. Guess which newspaper rang me that day to ask me to write an article about how the mask has slipped and now everyone must realise that Farage is not to be trusted and he's not someone you can vote for. Guess which newspaper it was, Matt? Just to highlight what he has ushered in to a space that would previously have not tolerated his bigotry and his bile. Just have a guess at what newspaper it was.
Yeah, if it's unexpected, it would be the Mail. Would that be right?
Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. 100% right. That was in 2014. That was only 10 years ago that the Mail would greet the public debagging of Nigel Farage as something that needed to be both celebrated and disseminated. And then, of course, a year or 2 years later, they were rolling the red carpet out for him. And that's what I mean about the speed with which the country has undergone these paroxysms of unpleasantness. Thank you, Matt. Ben's in Leeds. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. What a treat to be on. Can I put forward a chapter 12?
Go on.
Joe Public.
That's contempt for the con men, compassion for the con, though, isn't it, Ben?
No, I don't think so. I think I think a lot of people would argue, well, we didn't vote for this if you vote Tory, and I completely understand that view. But I think the sad reality that I'll wake up to on the 4th of July is there won't be in a sort of a Blackadder-esque moment where they announce Tory party, no votes.
No.
So there will be votes. There will be really intelligent people that will vote Tory again, and there will be people that look at a couple of Facebook clips and think, yeah, consistency, that sounds good. I'll tick the blue box. That terrifies me, to be honest.
Well, so you look at the figures, and rather than celebrating the scale of the lead, you can't quite believe that there's anybody still saying after 14 years of this, do you know what I really want? I'd like a little bit more, please.
We can't just pin all the blame on the people that we vote for. That's not how it works. And I think
we've got to blame each other. We've got to go after our Uncle Keith's and our Auntie Doris's Facebook pages.
I would just implore people, please, 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 do your homework and don't get taken in by the snazzy suit, even if it's a bit damp.
Yeah, about 23%, I think, on the sort of polling of polls at the moment. So it's almost the same as the lead. The lead is 22% on the one I'm looking at.
That terrifies me.
And you're thinking, how can you show me a room with 100 people in it, and 23 of them are looking at what we're looking at and thinking, yeah, I know who I like, I know who I support.
Could I just say I've started reading your book. I don't know if you remember the episode of Friends where Joey finds it a bit difficult and decides to put the book in the fridge because it's a little bit too real. But that's how I felt about yours. So maybe I'll finish it one day.
I hope so, although I think you've already arrived at some of the conclusions that it would lead you to. Thank you, Ben. I enjoyed that conversation a lot. We're going to be talking a lot about politics in the course of the next 6 weeks. I wonder whether we're going to reach a saturation point akin to the one that Rishi Sunak reached yesterday, giving that speech outside. Am I right? Saturate? No? I don't know why I bother. In fact, I won't bother anymore. It's Mystery Hour next, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. If you have a riddle that needs riddling, if you have an enigma that needs unravelling, or a mystery that needs solving, then help is at hand. If you want to book your space on the switchboard, you know what to do. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I always enjoy Mystery Hour, but I can say that this week I don't feel like I need it as much as I usually do.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 12 is the time, your weekly opportunity to achieve all sorts of satisfaction. If you're not familiar with this feature, I think it's fair to say, have you noticed how many first-time callers we've had in the last couple of weeks? It's been off the charts. It's a bit like, is there a phrase for it, like a psychological phenomenon? Because if one person does it, then it means other people are likely to do it as well. So we might go through a period of having lots of first-time callers, but they don't mention it. But if they hear someone else mention it, then anyway, there's probably a phrase for that, a psychological description of that. But it does mean that you may not be familiar with this feature if you're relatively new to the programme, in which case I should give you a quick heads up. It's very, 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 very different from the other 14 hours of the week that I am lucky enough to get to spend with you. And it is on paper, it's sort of quite ordinary sounding, isn't it? People ring in with questions and then, wait for it, other people ring in with answers. But somewhere between those 2 points, magic happens. A form, if you like, of radio alchemy. And that is why we generally love it so much. We'll be underway in a moment. Let me tell you that if you are the contributor that I enjoy the most this week, if you make the contribution I enjoy the most, if you are my favourite caller, in other words, then you will win a Mystery Hour board game, which is a thing of absolute beauty. And you can find out more about the Mystery Hour board game, and indeed buy your own if you're not lucky enough to win one, at mysteryhour.co.uk. The terms and conditions for this competition, because contrary to the impression I may occasionally give to you, this is a proper grown-up radio show with all the rules and regulations required. The terms and conditions for the competition under which you can win a Mystery Hour board game can be found at lbc.co.uk. Shall we just crack on? I think we should, don't you? 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Cheryl is in Canterbury. Cheryl, question or answer?
Hello.
Hello.
I've got a question. So, Downing Street,
yes.
Does anybody else live on Downing Street? So, like, if Keir Starmer does become the next Prime Minister, can he pop into the family at number 2 for a cup of sugar or something?
I see what you mean. So, you've got number 10 and number 11.
Yeah.
Which we know the Chancellor and the Prime Minister live in. I think the answer to your question is no. I think the rest of it is offices. But I shall certainly not go definitive on that. I mean, it'd be a bit of a hassle, wouldn't it? If you were just a normal punter who lived at number 73. You had to go through the police. You had to go to the police cordon every time you wanted a pint of milk. On the other hand, it would be quite safe. It would be quite secure. So it's all swings and roundabouts. Does anybody, apart from politicians and their families, senior politicians and their families, does anybody else live on Downing Street?
Yeah, exactly.
I like it. You're on. We shall find out. I imagine someone will know that. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Alexi is in Marlow. Alexi, question or answer?
Question, please, mate.
Carry on.
So on Sunday, I went to get my maple syrup.
Oh, yeah.
And it had mould in it, so I was a bit confused.
Right.
Because I've only had it for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe it had something added in it or something, or it wasn't like a pure form of maple syrup.
Right. So you mean you just went to get it out of the cupboard?
I got it out of the cupboard, yeah, and it had mould in it. Just made my pancakes.
Yeah.
And I looked at the sugar content, and it was about 80% sugar. So then I was wondering, why does honey not go mouldy in? Honey can last thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
But
if this was QI, then and Jonathan Davis was here, he'd mention the pyramids, and then the alarm would go off behind him, wouldn't he?
Yes,
I think they found honey in the pyramids that was still edible, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
I know the answer to this. Would you believe?
Do you now?
Yeah, I do. So it's all about bacteria, as you would expect, given that you're talking about mould. And the reason why I know the answer to this is because I know about the honey question. I wanted to know about honey being in the pyramids when my children were young and they were doing it for a project at school. And it's just to do with water. There's not enough water in honey to allow bacteria to live, to survive. Or Alan Davis, not Jonathan Davis, sorry. To allow bacteria or mould to survive. So you need to have a certain amount of water in there for bacteria to live, and there isn't enough water in honey, but there is clearly, given that you have mould in your maple syrup, there is clearly enough water in maple syrup for mould to survive.
Okay, so what is that water content then? What is the difference between it?
What do you mean the difference? I don't know the numbers. I've given you the answer, Alexi. I'm not a scientist. You need to have a certain water content in order for bacteria to survive. You could ask me what the process is that kills the bacteria, if you wanted.
Yeah, go on. I'll go with that, mate.
Okay, well, it is actually osmosis. Because the bacteria can't absorb enough water from. I didn't say anything then. Sorry, Keith's getting excited. The bacteria can't absorb enough water from the honey to survive, but when it's in maple syrup, it can. That, mate, is one of the best answers that I've ever given on Mystery Hour.
Well done, mate.
Thank you.
Done.
Thanks, Alexia. I can tell that you appreciate that. Round of applause for me. Thank you.
Round of applause, mate.
Thanks. Thank you, mate. You stay safe. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. No steward's inquiry on that one. I'm rocking it. I'm absolutely I might even award myself the board game if things carry on like this. Mark's in Morden. Mark, question or answer?
Hi, James. I got a question for you today.
Carry on.
It's about a similar thing, actually. It's about jam.
What is happening to Mystery Hour? It's a spread-based Mystery Hour. This is ridiculous. Go on, what?
The question is, why can I not buy blackberry jam in the supermarket?
Well, I can't believe it, but I think I know the answer to this one as well.
No way. Do you know the answer
I think I do, yeah. It's not.
I've been asking people for years about this. No one seems to know.
Are you sure? You definitely can't buy it in the supermarket?
Yeah, the thing is, I've looked up all the different brands and everything that you can get in the supermarket.
I think I know.
Okay.
I don't think blackberries are a viable commercial crop.
Oh, you think it's the preserving process?
No, I think that we haven't got. I mean, to pick blackberries in order to make jam. Have you been blackberrying lately?
Yeah, we do it every summer. Well, when I was a kid, we did it every summer because my Elwyn would make blackberry jam.
Yeah, and how hazardous is it?
Not really.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on!
You've got to reach in, and the bushes don't grow in a way that makes picking the fruit easy. It's not like oranges, is it, or strawberries or raspberries? How would you harvest blackberries if you grew a field full of blackberry bushes, presuming that you could, but you grew a field full of blackberry bushes, there's no way that you would be able to harvest them safely and sufficiently and efficiently enough to make a profit. So you end up, they are foraged rather than cropped. What's the word for growing a crop? They are foraged rather than farmed, and therefore there are simply not enough quantities available to have a proper production process.
And the same wouldn't apply for raspberries or any of the other...
No, much easier. You can grow them as crops, but you can't grow blackberries as crops.
Oh, okay. I didn't know it was that simple.
You can buy... Oh, hang on. Apparently you can buy blackberry jelly from Ocado. Or...
But if you... That's what I'm going to say. If you look, like, on Amazon, for example, you could buy blackberry jam from a lot of these companies, but they don't sell it in the supermarket.
Oh, well then, I'm almost certainly got this completely wrong, actually. You can even buy it at Jeremy Clarkson's farm. I think you're just going to the wrong supermarkets, Mark. You've misled me with your question. Also, have you looked for bramble?
I've gone to all the different ones. I've gone to, like, all around London.
You can't have gone to all... I can see it for sale on the Sainsbury's website.
What? No, it isn't. I just looked.
It's called bramble jam.
I don't know.
I do. It's bramble jam. So I made up an answer then, and it was completely wrong. And it sounded so plausible, didn't it? It sounded so convincing. You can buy blackberry jam is the answer. If you can't buy it in supermarkets, it's because, I don't know, there isn't enough of it. You can buy banana jam. Cool, that sounds nice. Banana and chili jam. That sounds like... Well, listen, Mark, I promise you can buy it. Because they all do one. Wilkinson and Sons does one. Mackay's does one. Diddley Squat Farm does one. They're all over. So the question was asked on false pretences. 12 minutes after 12 is the time. So you live and learn. Jim's in Cardiff. Jim, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, Jim.
It's the bumblebee question about flying, whereby, they're supposed to be not able to fly because of the aerodynamics of particularly a bumblebee.
Yeah.
But they don't know that, so they're able to fly.
Yeah.
Has that now been answered? Because I would think computing and, modellings have probably answered it, but would we know if it has?
So you mean according to what we thought were the laws of aerodynamics, a bumblebee should not be able to fly?
Yeah, but they obviously can.
Do we know why, how that apparent anomaly was resolved? Yeah. I like that question, actually. I didn't think I was going to, but I quite like the idea that when we were kids, we were taught that. But surely, since then, the world has risen to the challenge of working out how a bumblebee can fly.
Yes. Yeah. In order to go and gather the stuff for the bramble jelly.
For the bees and the bramble jelly. There is, apart from the people living in Downing Street, unless by some amazing miracle of Mystery Hour, there is a jam maker living in Downing Street, I'm not going to be able to knit together all 4 questions that have been asked so far this week, but I can certainly knit together 3 of them. Has the wit of man risen to the challenge of explaining the flight of a bumblebee? 0345 6060 973. Is the number that you need. Rod's in Hillingdon. Rod, question or answer?
It's a question.
Carry on.
So I want to know why there is no live feed for a cockpit in a plane back to the control tower.
Why do you want to know that?
Because I've been watching a lot of aircraft crash investigations, and it's always voice recordings.
Yeah.
And it's for like the past 30 minutes or so.
Well, what would you learn from a CCTV feed, from a live camera feed?
You have engineers that work for the company that could tell the pilot, or if they've missed something, they can see it live. So,
is it going to be the difference between broadcasting audio and broadcasting video?
Could be, or
how would you get a live feed from a cockpit back to Earth?
The same way we have Wi-Fi on planes.
But that's a rate. Does the Wi-Fi work on a plane to film?
I believe so.
So you could put your camera on in the cabin as a passenger and FaceTime someone on land while flying.
On some flights, yeah.
Can you do that? I don't fly much anymore. I'm not being funny, Rod. I just don't know. I haven't tried it.
Yeah, it's just always voice recordings, and it's normally like the last 30 minutes or so. So
no, I know. So okay, so why do they not have a video feed? Are you in the garden at the moment?
Yeah, I'm just by the door.
That's nice. I like. There's a little bird there, isn't there? I can hear it tweeting away. Always adds to the programme somehow when there's a bird tweeting about. I should get some for the studio. I could get some parrots and teach them to say rude words when Ferrari's on. Okay. So why? Because you'd think for safety reasons, if you could see into the cockpit, that would be a good thing.
The other day we had the turbulence where the person sadly died, and
yes,
we're going to have to take
that was a horrible story.
pilot statements and everything like that. Whereas if you had a video link,
link might have helped. And people are pointing out. Jonathan's pointed out that you can see a live stream on a space station, so it's obviously technologically possible to have one on an aeroplane. I think we can close down that avenue now. I like it, Rod. Why don't we have live feeds or video feeds in aeroplane cockpits? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:16.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation continues, or at least where Mystery Hour continues. Does anyone else live on Downing Street, apart from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and their families? I believe I smashed the maple syrup question out of the park. The blackberry jam question, I'm afraid I completely made up an answer to that, and it was completely wrong. So I was about to get cross. I just caught myself there in time to stop embarrassing myself, unlike Rishi Sunak yesterday. So people were sending me messages telling me that you can buy blackberries in Waitrose. And I was about to go, listen, we're not talking about blackberries. Of course you can buy... We're talking about blackberry jam. But, of course, the reason why you were sending me messages telling me that you can buy blackberries in Waitrose was to challenge my thesis that blackberries are too difficult to harvest to be a commercially viable crop. Because if you can buy a punnet of blackberries in Waitrose, then clearly they are a commercially viable crop. And if they are a commercially viable crop, why would you not be able to buy jam made from them in the same way that you can buy jam made from all other commercially viable crops? And then, to compound the embarrassment that I just avoided, it emerges that you can actually buy blackberry jam, and that Mark's question, was predicated upon false premises. But somehow I feel that there could be an answer to the question of why can't he buy blackberry jam in Sainsbury's, or indeed he claimed any other supermarket. So I'll leave that on the board. Do we know how bumblebees can fly, given that when we were kids, we were taught that their apparent ability to fly, well, not their apparent ability to fly, their ability to fly defied what we thought we knew about aerodynamics? And why don't you have video feeds in the cockpits of aeroplanes? Kalisha is in Greenwich. Kalisha, question or answer?
It's a question.
Yes.
A few weeks ago, I was on a narrowboat going to Little Venice.
How delightful.
Oh, it was. It was very delightful. So there's a part where the canal goes over the road on the North Circ A406, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
And how is that possible that a road can be underneath the canal?
Well, it's not that much of a mystery, is it?
Well, it is, because it's a canal.
Yeah, I know.
It's not a man-made river.
Well, it is. It is a man-made river. That's exactly what a canal is.
But how can the water kind of float? But it's not floating.
Have you ever heard the word? Have you ever? I'm going to say a word now, Kalisha, and I want you to tell me whether you've ever heard this word before.
All right.
Aqueduct.
Is that a cartoon character?
No, not aqueduct. Aqueduct. There's no silent T here. It's not like hasten. Have you ever heard the word aqueduct?
No.
You've never heard the word aqueduct?
No.
Ah. I think I'm getting to the heart of the problem here, slowly but surely. I've got another word for you. Have you ever heard the word viaduct?
Oh, I've heard viaduct, yeah.
What's a viaduct?
It's a vacuum cleaner.
No, it's not. I don't know. Okay. Have you ever been to Sloane Square tube station?
Yes.
Right. Have you ever noticed above your head an enormous pipe?
I can't say I've looked up.
So
I will next week.
You can take my word for it that if you go to Sloane Square tube station, there is a river, an actual river, going above your head, but it's in a pipe. Engineers, when they dug the station out, the course of the river was unchanged because they put it in a pipe. Now imagine if you had a chainsaw and you could chop the top off that pipe, what would you be left with? So you only had half a pipe with the river still in it. What would you be left with?
A water flume. And
that's what you drove under, or actually that's what you sailed over when you were on the A406, when you were on the canal above the A406. Just between Park Royal, isn't it, and Alperton? About.
Yes, from the Hanger Lane roundabout and up from
so
there.
It is.
Yes.
So it's you know, it's a river in the sky because it was built by engineers. In the same way that there's a river in the sky at Sloane Square Station, and indeed the Romans invented the word viaduct and aqueduct, which means water. Well, the duct, I suppose, means pipe or lead or something like that. But aqua is water, so it just means there's a waterway in the sky above your head.
Right, but which came first, the road or the river?
Probably the road, because the river would be harder to build, wouldn't it? Oh, do you mean on the A406?
Yes, the canal or the road.
That I don't know, but it doesn't matter because I've answered your question.
Oh, you're such a clever clog.
I know. It's so annoying, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's good.
Oh, bless you. I'll have a round of applause. What on earth is a viaduct vacuum cleaner?
Oh, something that sucks up water?
This is the strangest mystery hour. But we've got an answer, so I'll take the round of applause. Thank you, Kalisha. Well done. I mean, there are some. If there are places you could go to. There's a place in North Wales, I forget the name of. There are. Don't go yet, Kalisha. There are aqueducts that make the one you sailed over look like I mean, there are massive aqueducts out there, like absolutely huge aqueducts. Is it Pontsillet in North Wales or something? But I mean, seriously, look it up on Google. There are some of these things are enormous. They'll blow your brains out.
Okay, I will.
There you go. That's your afternoon sorted. 25 minutes after 12 is the time. Gregor is in Kilburney. Gregor, question or answer?
Hello, James. I have a question.
Carry on, Gregor.
Before I do, I just want to say I want to put in a testimonial for bramble jam. It is absolutely delicious.
Is it jam, though? Or is it jelly jam?
Well, I mean, you when you get it in the shops, it's jelly. But when I make it, I make jam. And that just means you get a lot of, crushed up bits of insects in there. But I'm kind of okay with that.
Not insects. Cochineal.
You get some insects, but it's all good.
Why do you get insects?
Well, because the insects feast on the fruit of the brambles. You get lots of little flies and grubs and stuff.
But you wash them before you make jam.
Yeah, but you don't get all of them.
Are you joking me? This is a thing. It's a known thing that if you want to make blackberry jam, you're going to have to be. So you couldn't feed it to a vegetarian, for example.
Well, I mean, I'm a vegetarian.
Well, you're not. Clearly, you eat insects. Knowingly.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose yes, that is true. I knowingly eat insects.
Well, you live and learn. And also, what's the bird life in the background on this call?
Mainly crows, to be honest. The tits are out, but they're not making much noise because the crows are being very noisy.
Right, you are. For the lads. Question or answer, Gregor?
Yeah, sorry. My question is, what is the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
Oh, I thought we'd just gone peak Finbar Saunders with your last comment on the programme. Okay.
So the traditional answer to this is there is no difference fundamentally. They're the same instrument.
Yeah.
However, I'm an amateur violinist, as a very, very amateur. And
a professional fiddler.
We'll not go to that one. I went to a concert recently where there was a bit of classical and a bit of folk, and the violinist had a violin for fiddle, and then he took out for the kind of more trad stuff. He took out a fiddle. It was a fiddle. It was a different instrument.
How do you know it was a different instrument and not just differently tuned or strung or something?
I see. Well, I mean, it was two separate instruments.
Yeah, I know.
What I mean. But I mean, fundamentally,
but guitarists
they're
have that. Roadies bring out different guitars, but they're all guitars.
Yeah, I get what you mean, but my point is that they made slightly different sounds. They had a different sort of timbre, I guess you'd call it. They had a different sort of.
So is there a difference between a violin and a fiddle?
I want to know why, the sort of mechanics of it, if that makes sense. Why one that maybe it's made out of a different wood, maybe the strings are of a different material, but why does it sound so different, and why does it sound so much better for the folk stuff?
I like it. No, you're on. Yeah, the difference between a violin and a fiddle, please, in the context of a concert where the performer played classical music with one instrument and folk music with another, and they were clearly different instruments, very different sounding instruments. Do we know what would have happened there? 28 minutes after 12. And speaking, of course, of professional fiddlers, I should remind you that Rishi Sunak called a general election yesterday, and the Conservative Party will be fighting it on their 14-year-long record. Kevin is in, good Lord, we're going from Kilburney in North Ayrshire to, is it Caherdaniel in Kerry?
Caherdaniel, James.
Caherdaniel. I could have had a crack at that,
The
Kevin.
town of Daniel, yeah.
Of course it is.
The great Derrynane, the home of the Liberator, Daniel O'Connell, right? Right?
The town of Daniel.
James,
Daniel's town. Caherdaniel. Yeah. Question or answer for you?
Daniel's Fort, sir.
Fort, right you are. Question or answer?
Right, yeah. Question.
Carry on.
And I think I understand you're a bit of a cook yourself, and so it's a foodie thing.
You're not wrong there.
Right.
You're not wrong there.
Right. Yeah. And you like celery. I know you like celery. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So my question is, like, because we live in a rural location, we get beautiful fresh meat and fish, and we freeze it, right?
Yes.
But with meat, every time we take out the meat and put it on the plastic bag. It's in a plastic bag, of course, and you put it on a plate, have it thaw. Blood appears on the plate.
Yeah.
How does that happen if the bag is fully sealed? There's no holes. It happens almost every time. How come?
Well, I can begin to answer this question.
Okay.
It's not blood.
It's not blood. It's red.
I know.
Yeah.
It's myoglobin is what it is. I've dealt with this question before. So
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Why are you apologising?
Because, I've only been listening for 3 years. 3 years.
Exactly. So there's no need to apologise. All human life is here. It's not blood.
Okay.
It's found. It's in muscle tissue. Myoglobin is in the tissue of the muscle, and freezing damages the tissue of the muscle, so the myoglobin seeps out. But the question of how, because there's no blood in a frozen bit of meat, really. It would have been hanged and all taken care of. You can get it from a chicken as well. You can even get it from a chicken. It doesn't even have to be red meat. So the myoglobin is what you're seeing. But if you honestly believe that your plastic bag is hermetically sealed, then how it comes out while defrosting, I wouldn't be able to answer, would I? But maybe it's not as tightly sealed as you think it is.
It's one of these Ziploc ones approved for a freezer, right? And
I don't think it's airtight. I don't think it's airtight. I think that it's you could seep out.
And if it's not airtight, why are you supposed to while you're freezing? Why are you supposed to dismiss the air? Right?
Well, because you've got a little bit of air can get in, but it's not.
Bit.
Yeah, so it's wrapped up, but the air can seep out through the crevices and the gaps.
Yeah.
Well, what else could it be, Kevin?
I don't know, but
what else could it be? I mean, literally.
If you put the bag underneath a tap, filled with water, you could walk around and it wouldn't seep, right?
What?
So, and if you say
it would seep. It would seep if you filled it up with water and sealed, and then tied it up, however it was tied up with the meat inside, and then left it on a dry plate. The plate would be wet after half an hour.
Only maybe with condensation or something, but I don't. It should be
condensation. It can't be condensation if it's myoglobin, can it?
No, but if you left a cold plastic bag, and if there's moisture in the air, it would condensate. So that could be condensation.
I didn't know we were going to be doing science, Kevin. I didn't know we were going to be doing.
I know. I'm sorry.
Irish history, Irish Republican history, science, myoglobin, cookery. Why? Before you go, because I'm late for the news. Why? Where did you get the idea that I'm particularly fond of celery?
You've brought it up a few times, yeah.
Are you sure?
And you said yes, celery.
Celery.
You kind of said in one thing, yeah, because I'm a great lover of celery. Anything I can put celery in, yeah.
So you saw a fellow celery lover, really, and you thought, here's a radio show I can relate to.
Oh, yeah, no, I was looking for something that we had in common, I suppose.
And that's what we've got. We'll always have.
we have celery.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ken, we will always have celery.
We will, yeah, if nothing else. Yeah.
I'll try and get you an answer about the frozen meat. At 12:33, Amelia Cox has the headlines. 12:36 is the time. I think it was the bolognese, wasn't it? It was the sofrito sauce. Because last week, the fellow who couldn't cook carrots because he never sweated them. His carrots were always hard in his... But if you're tuning in for election analysis, I'm very sorry. But Sheila will be here at 1 o'clock, so don't worry, just hold tight. And then I explained to him that if you really, for your sofrito, for your base of a bolognese, you should have celery. Celery, and that's where Kevin, I think, derived his appreciation of my fellow fondness. We're both big celery fellas. Grand. Will's in Frankfurt. Will, question or answer?
Hi, James, mate. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Answer for you.
Oh, good. It's about time. Carry on.
It's an answer to the CCTV in cockpits.
Yes.
So essentially, the aircraft is already, for most large transport aircraft, it'll be transmitting data constantly throughout the flight. The parameters of the engine, any problems that come up, it all gets transmitted over various systems to the airline and also to, for example, the engine manufacturers. They're always tracking what's going on. But essentially, the systems that we use are either very high frequency radio, you can get sort of data connection when we're over land, and satellite when we're over water or sort of in the middle of nowhere, really. And there's just simply not really the bandwidth there to transmit either a live feed of CCTV, and then in terms of using Wi-Fi, that would then be essentially you could potentially have issues with the security of the data and keeping aircraft relevant data separate to out of the hands of hackers, for example, or that sort of thing.
There's no particular benefit to be gained from it, and there are
not really, no.
And there are obvious negatives. Also, I could see a case for having something recorded, but how on earth would anyone watch it? How many planes are in the sky at any given time?
Well, I mean, if you go on Flight Radar, it shows you how many flights they're tracking at any one time, and I mean there must be thousands, tens of thousands at any one time. And as you say, if you're watching it live, what are they really going to do? I mean, even a recording after an accident or something, you've already got all the data most of the time that you need. Any button we push, anything we say, anything... Yeah,
bingo. No, it's a good question, but it admits a very comprehensive and good answer, doesn't it?
Yeah, as with aviation, a lot of it all comes down to safety and the sort of cost-benefit analysis.
So and then it comes out, but there's no point doing it on that basis. Qualifications, I think we've worked it out.
You might, I'm an airline pilot. I fly the Boeing 777.
There we go. Well, are you in Frankfurt on a stopover or a layover or?
No, I live in Frankfurt, and I just I commute from there, and
Happy days. Round of applause for Will.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Where are you off to next? Do you know?
First, I've got a few weeks off, and then my next flight is to Delhi. But I got in from Bahrain and Singapore the other day, and I took my girlfriend along with me for the very first time.
Oh, how lovely!
Yeah, very first time that that it all worked out.
Oh, isn't that nice? I bet that's quite impressive, isn't it? As a job when you're sort of courting, when you're dating. Thank you, Will. 12:40 is the time. Andrew's in Fulham. Andrew, question or answer?
I have an answer for the Bumblebee question, Ali.
So we're staying in the air.
We are indeed. So as the answer is simply there was a point in time when we didn't know scientists didn't explain why bumblebees could fly, because they just assumed that the wings flapped up and down. That was until there was one of the David Attenborough series.
Really?
Essentially they pointed a very slow-mo camera at the bumblebee, and what they realised was that at the very top of when they were flapping their wings, at the very top, they kind of did a little scoop. Larson, calm down. Did a little very scoop at the very top of when they were flapping their wings, and then the scientists took that information away and went, yes, that explains that.
What do you mean by a little scoop? What do we mean by a little scoop? Also, did you just tell me to calm down?
No, sorry, my dog. It's my dog.
That's all right.
It's my dog's time to pop out for a relief, and he said.
Oh well, let's not keep you unduly. So, what do you mean by a scoop?
Like it goes circularly up and round.
So like a rotation, sort of.
Yes, like a rotation.
So it's like oh wow! So it's not just flapping; it's also doing a little spin type thing.
Yes.
Which creates more uplift.
It does indeed, yes.
And they filmed it in such slow motion that they could actually see that happening for the very first time ever.
Yes.
Wow, David Attenborough, man. Qualifications, I know we know, but you need to say it for the tape.
I just watched that documentary series.
That's all right. No, that counts. That's a qualification. It gets you a round of applause. Fantastic. Now get that dog out quick, Andrew, before you have an accident. 12:42 is the time. Josh is in Worcester. Josh, question or answer?
Oh, hello. You're right, James. It's a question.
Carry on.
What it is, have you ever looked when I was just speaking to your the lady on the phone?
Yeah.
For example, she's looking at you through the glass.
Not very often.
But she says she can also see the television screens that are behind her in the reflection of that glass.
Yeah. How can your question be based on a room you've never been in?
Because that's what I've been told by your researcher. That's what she can see.
Right.
But what it is, I want to know. Basically, if I'm in the car.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the passenger window, for example.
Yeah.
I can see houses.
Right.
But I can also see the reflection of the trees from the opposite side in the glass.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm consciously able to switch between what my eyes are focusing on.
Yeah.
Either the houses or the trees from the reflection. And I just want to know how that is. What is it that's allowing me to do that?
But it's not. I mean, it doesn't have to be the reflection. It could be anything. There could be some trees behind the houses, and you can focus on them as well.
No. I'm on about specifically the reflection. It could be in any situation, but reflection of glass.
So
you're either looking at directly what you're looking at,
or you can switch. You flick a switch in your brain, and you're focusing more on the reflection than you are on what's actually in front of you. But why is this a mystery?
Because I want to know how that is. What is it? My brain or my eyes allowing me to do that?
It's your brain telling your eyes what to focus on.
Well, how if I'm looking at two things at the same time? So how am I able to switch between what I'm looking at?
Because your eyes will. I mean, it's like a lens, isn't it? It's just like a camera. You know, when you twist the lens on a camera, and you change the focus, isn't it?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question, because I just think it's. I can literally switch between the focus.
Yeah, I know. I hope you don't think this is a superpower. Everyone can do this, Josh. You can do what? You can switch between. No, well, I mean, I'll put it on the board, but I think it's going to be quite a boring answer. I think it's going to be your brain can decide what it wants to focus on, and it sends that message to your eyes, and then your eyes do it.
Well, if that's the answer, then maybe so. But I just wanted to hear it from somebody that maybe knows more than me.
More than me as well. You're too polite to say. All right, I'll leave it on the board. What we want is some sort of eye specialist.
Well, yeah, if you got one.
Well, there's bound to be one. It's just the question of whether we can get them on quick enough. Thank you, Josh. It's 12:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So we've got Josh's eyes and reflections. We've got Kevin's meat. We've got Gregor's fiddle. I've done Kalisha's aqueduct. We've done Rod's CCTV. We've done the bees as well. What was the name of the nice fella that answered the bee question? The blackberry jam we kind of done. And Cheryl's Downing Street question, we haven't gone near. Does anyone else live on Downing Street? Apart from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and their respective families. It's 12:45. 12:48 is the time already. Shall we crack on? Nick's in Sevenoaks. Nick, question or answer?
James, I have an answer for you, I think.
I hope so. Carry on, Nick.
It's on the fiddle violin question.
Oh, marvellous. What's the difference?
There isn't. The purists will tell you there is no difference.
Okay.
There might be a difference insofar as the violin tends to be, the classical violin tends to be strung with more synthetic materials like gut, and the fiddle might have a slightly stronger string. But the reason I know this is that I happen to know probably one of the world's leading experts on this, who I'm afraid is far too old to make this call. He's 87.
Gosh.
And I've been very lucky to see some of the very finest, beautiful instruments of 400, 500, 600 years old. And they are violins, but I have never once heard him call them anything other than a fiddle.
Oh, how lovely. Oh, how lovely.
So he calls them fiddles. And that's how I know it. And I'm also a bit of a sort of classical music nut, and I do my own podcast. So that's
What's the podcast called, Nick?
Oh, that's sweet of you to ask me that question. It's called Perfect Pitch.
Perfect Pitch.
Classical music deconstructed.
Oh, great title.
And it's out weekly on all your favourite platforms.
They're well played. You see, there you go. And so, to go back to the original question, the performer who was alternating between Gregor's question asked about classical and folk, it would be just that the sound that he wants for folk comes from a differently strung fiddle than the sound that he wants for classical.
It's a slightly more modern string, which might give a slightly different sound.
Beautiful.
But in terms of the terminology, a dealer or an expert, as I say, this chap's been doing it for 60 odd years. He still calls the old violins strung with gut. He still calls them a fiddle.
It's a Stradivarius fiddle over there on the show.
Exactly.
I love it.
That.
Nick, you've earned yourself a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
No, thank you. And good luck with Perfect Pitch. It's a very good title for a podcast. 12:51 is the time. Ian's in Waterloo. Ian, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, Ian.
Downing Street, there's one other person that lives there, and that's the Chief Whip that lives at 12.
Is that it? Just the three? So the Chief Whip...
Just the three.
Do you know, I got to today years old before I found out that the Chief Whip lived on Downing Street.
Yeah, Chief Whip. So you've got the gates with the 4 or 5 police officers, and then a little gatehouse on the left. You've got the side of the Cabinet Office, and then you've got number 10, number 11, number 12. And then opposite is just the back of offices again.
Qualifications?
I go up and down past there 5 or 6 times a day.
Well, so do lots of people. It doesn't mean they know what's in there.
Well, I do a lot of, because I do a bit of research on.
Nice.
You know, I know where all the departments are. You know, you got the Home Office on Marsham Street. You got the Department of Transport opposite one side of there. You've got the Cabinet Office, obviously, and you've got the Department of Culture, Media and Sport on Whitehall. So yeah, just when you can pass them all the time, it's good to find out what goes on there, basically.
I like it. Round of applause for Ian. 100% certain, just the Chief Whip, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. There's no one else. There's no one. I did not know that. It's almost not as embarrassing as Hasongate yesterday. I got to the age of 52 without knowing that the T in Hasten is silent. But I did not know that the Chief Whip lived on Downing Street. Tom's in Ongar. Tom, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on.
Iceland is covered in green, and Greenland is covered in ice. Why are they named the wrong way round? Or at least appear to be?
Is Iceland not quite cold?
Not particularly.
Not as cold as Greenland?
Greenland's largely covered in ice as far as I'm aware. I mean, you look at them on a map, Greenland's white and Iceland's green. I mean, I've been to Iceland, I've never been to Greenland.
I don't know what the answer would be. Something to do with the Danes who used to, and the Norwegians. They always sort of fought over ownership, didn't they? I called it that. It was the first bit of green you reached after you... No, because you'd be going north, not south, wouldn't you? Okay. I mean... I'm
not holding up my hopes at this time, but
it could be Viking propaganda.
Right, okay, yeah, fair enough.
Seriously, I'm not even joking.
Okay.
But we will find out. Why is Greenland called Greenland even though it's full of ice, and Iceland's called Iceland even though it's full of green? We shall try and find out for you. Got times, 12:53. Adam is in Letchworth, Garden City. Adam, question or answer?
It's an answer. It's answer Stu's inquiry, actually, on the number 12
I bet it's the...
12 Downing Street.
Yeah, knew it. I thought that sounded wrong.
Used to have the chief whip living in there until the late 90s, and I think Alistair Campbell kicked him out.
Why?
I think they wanted to. I think they were making use of the office space.
Probably just in a bad mood, was he? Knowing Alistair, he's probably just in a grumpy mood.
So.
Decided to take it out on the chief whip. So now it's just the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
That's it.
Qualifications?
Well, I worked for the government at the time.
Oh, that'll do. Round of applause for Adam, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Martin's in Swanley. Martin, question or answer?
It's an answer about the blackberries.
Carry on.
There's two problems with it regards to foraging.
Yes.
It's relatively difficult to determine how ripe the berries are, whether they're at the stage where they need to be picked.
Yeah.
Also, they need to be the right size as well. So it's not so easy just to employ people. You kind of have to train them up, and you have to go have an eye for it. And the second problem is that it's quite difficult to pick them without squishing the berries. So what they've done since 2021, farmers have started using this new machinery where it goes down the rows of the berries, and there's a camera that draws a box around the berries, and then it uses a suction cup underneath the berries to gently pick it. So considering that it's quite new machinery, I suspect we'll probably be seeing more berries on the shelves coming.
It's like a vacuum cleaner?
Kind of. It's like
I think it's been on Clarkson's farm. I don't watch Clarkson's farm. Not like, but I think he used a real Hoover as a kind of.
It's an arm that goes up, and it's got three soft inner bits that grab the berry gently, and it sucks it. And there's cameras attached to the arm that can focus on the berry for precise manoeuvring.
Wow! So it was in many ways. Then Mark's dreams are coming true in real time as we speak, aren't they?
Hopefully. Yeah.
So you will soon. So I was right in the sense that it was too fiddly to be commercially viable as a crop.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't incorrect. It was, yeah.
But now it is a bit like the bumblebee and David Attenborough. Technology is changing the very fabric of Mystery Hour in real time while we speak.
There we go.
Qualifications?
Studying to be a biologist. I just finished my last biology test for A-level about 3 hours ago.
Oh, well done.
Hoping I do well.
And we've got a few as well. But how do you know this bit?
The Channel 4 have recently had a documentary about how things get to the supermarket shelves, and it showed this machine. So.
Sensational answer. Well played, Martin. Thank you, mate. Good luck with the A-levels.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, absolutely. A round of applause. Sam's in Collierswood. Sam, question or answer?
Hi, James. Answer.
Carry on.
It's about the eye question.
Good man.
It was slightly ambiguous, but what I would assume he was asking is how his eye can focus on two different things. What I assume he was talking about from looking into a car is that the reflection of the trees in the window, on the window, are from a different distance than what he's looking into the car. So what I would assume is that what you have is called suspensory ligaments in your eye that hold up the lens within your eye that change and contract and relax depending on the focal length to change what you're focusing on.
Love it.
So that is what I would assume.
That's a brilliant answer. What are your qualifications?
I'm studying biomedical science at university. And
See, that's what Josh wanted. That's what he wanted. He wanted use some of those fancy phrases again.
Suspensory ligament.
Yeah, and the other one?
The lens within your eye.
I know. There was another one as well. Lens, suspensory ligaments, and so was there something else as well?
Focal length.
Yes, focal length. Get in. And that's exactly what. There you go, Josh, mate. Suspensory ligaments and focal length, isn't it? All day long. Thank you. Well played, Sam. Robert's in Fulham. Robert, question or answer?
It's an answer. Well, it's not really an answer. It's a confirmation of your round of applause for Greenland.
Viking propaganda.
Viking propaganda. Basically, they were trying to repopulate Greenland. Nobody lived there. I think there were orcs and other wildlife. There's nothing there. And, they wanted people to get over there and live there, and they called it Greenland. It was as simple as that.
Go to Greenland, sunny Greenland. Make your home in Greenland. Do we know what the Viking king was called?
Normally it's Ethelred, isn't it? Something like that.
Did he? What? No, that would be Anglo-Saxon king. It would be. I don't know what an Anglo. And was there
I can't remember. I got it from a Dan Snow's history thing. So
can't argue with Dan Snow on any subjects from the podcast from the History Hit podcast. And was there a similar campaign to deter people from moving to Iceland, or was it all about encouraging people to move to Greenland?
Be on my pay grade.
Doesn't matter, mate. You've earned a round of applause. And I don't think there's much competition, is there, for today's Mystery Hour board game? It's got to go to Kalisha, who can play it on her canal boat next time she's sailing over an aqueduct. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, oh no, hang on. I just want to do a little just to mark the. So Sheila Fogarty is currently doing a visual gag, which I don't know you can see.
It doesn't really work on the radio.
It works for me.
What if I was sitting where you are?
It's a bespoke. Is she in shot? But I've got an audio. I just like to mark the big news today, the big political news today, with a little tribute from my good friend, the comedian and musician James Sherwood.
Nigel Farage won't be an MP this year, just like every other year.
And if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up.
Hang on.
What?
You can tell them about my visual joke.
Well, okay. Well, it's going to sound a bit...
You can't just ignore the fact that I'm sitting here with an umbrella over my head.
Well, you've told them now.
Well, that's all right. I want them to know. I found Rishi Sunak's umbrella.
Unlike Rishi Sunak, Sheila Fogarty is capable of both
prepared for everything,
wielding and understanding the importance of. So have you seen the picture of Barack Obama?
No.
With an umbrella.
Looking cool, no doubt.
Cooler than cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it.
Of course you can.
But he can't.
Did I look cool?
You looked super cool.
Thanks.
Not quite as cool as Barack Obama, but a lot cooler than Rishi Sunak.
Well, I'll keep trying.
If you want to listen back or catch up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind, then download it now for free. Global Player from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish for Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Time for